He's where?
And Sam Leandro,
Oh.
presenting a project.
Oh, okay. Oh, so he won't be here, okay.
To order, Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. Item 2 on our agenda, roll call.
Yes. Commissioner Donaldson?
Here?
Commissioner Jennings? Here. Commissioner McLeod? Here. Chair Waddy?
Here. Next up, any ex parte communications from the commission? Nope.
Nope.
Moving along. Item 4, the consent calendar. Consent calendar items are items considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion of the commission if no member of the commission or public pulls it off the agenda. We have item 4-1, the planning and zoning minutes from January 23rd. Item 4-2, application 19-004, design review for a second-story addition at 1012 Cornell. And item 4-3, application 19-005, design review and parking exception for a single-story rear addition at 960 Talbot Avenue. And I do actually need to recuse myself on both of the two projects on 1012 Cornell and 960 Talbot, as I live within 500 feet of both of those. So, should I just?
Okay.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll take this then. So is there any member of the audience that wishes to address the commission on an item on the consent calendar? Any members of the commission who wish to pull an item from consent
I'm
calendar?
fine with the consent calendar tonight.
I have no objections to those two projects.
Okay.
All right, then I'll move approval of the consent calendar.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nobody's opposed. Thank you.
Okay. So if you're here for 1012 Cornell or 960 Talbot, your projects have been approved. And
Did you guys do minutes?
We
it's a
did.
14-day appeal
do you
period,
have
we should
anything?
say, but you're fine, and good luck moving forward.
Yes, so if you have, if you have story polls up, they should stay up for the 14-day appeal period, just to be safe.
Right.
Thanks.
Great. Moving on to item number 5 on the agenda, public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the commission on an item that is not on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move along to item 6, new business. Item 6-1, presentation of draft concept for the Solano Avenue Complete Streets Plan.
Good evening. So we have our consultant from Tool Design Group. I was going to give you the presentation tonight. The commission last looked at this process in October of 2018. At that time, we just gave you a synopsis of all the outreach and work that had been prepared up to that point. I'm happy to tell you that we have the draft document. It's available online, and we are in the public comment period from February 11th through March 11th, and we expect to take the plan to City Council later this spring once all the comments and any revisions have been incorporated. So it's making its rounds this month with the commission as the first stop. It'll go to traffic and safety at the end of the month and then make its way eventually to City Council. And so with that, I will turn it over to our consultant, Megan Uli Usdahl, who has helped us throughout this process.
Thanks, Ann. Hi, it's good to be back to see you again. So as Ann said, my name is Megan, and I'm with Tool Design. We're a planning, engineering, and urban design firm, and we are working with the city to develop the Solano Avenue Complete Streets and Corridor Revitalization Plan. So I have a presentation. Launch into it. So tonight I'll be going over the schedule, an overview of the draft plan, and next steps in the process. So we began this project in around this time last year, about February of 2018, and throughout the process we have met with the Planning and Zoning Commission. This will be our second meeting, and we've also held ongoing outreach efforts and developed a corridor design and developed design elements which are represented in the draft plan. We are now at the point where we have the public review draft, so we are seeking public comments on the draft plan. We had a meeting with the Community Advisory Group earlier today, and we will be going to the Traffic and Safety Commission later in the month, and tentatively aiming towards the April 15th City Council meeting for possible adoption. So what I'm going to do now is kind of provide you a walk through the draft plan. So the Solano Avenue plan is the culmination of about a year of outreach and planning work. All of the elements have been pulled together into the draft plan, which includes an executive summary, a brief introductory chapter that discusses the process as well as the purpose of the plan and community goals. We also, in chapter 2, look into the existing conditions as well as the proposed both corridor design and design elements. Chapter 3 is a really unique chapter in that it provides a streetscape design palette. So these are really ideas for the city and the community to think about as they work on implementing the plan. They are examples from other communities and include an array of design elements. And then the 4th chapter looks at implementation. So I'll touch on those as well in a bit more detail. So the plan study area is Upper Solano Avenue, which is defined as Masonic to Tulare. This encompasses all of the right-of-way within the city of Albany, and then in the east of the corridor is a bit of buildings in the city of Berkeley, but the city of Albany does own the right-of-way in that area as well. The plan was developed through multiple community outreach efforts. So we had a kickoff open house in May of 2018. And then we also met with the Community Advisory Group at that time. In October, late September, we took the draft corridor design back out to the community with an event at Flowerland on Solano Avenue. And we also had a pop-up event on Ramona Avenue, which illustrated sort of hands-on what some of the corridor design features would include. We've also met, of course, with you, the Planning and Zoning Commission, Traffic and Safety Commission. City of Albany staff has been obviously very involved, but we've also been meeting with City of Berkeley staff with the recognition that this corridor plan does touch on some of their property as well. And then we've also had a great team comprised of Tool Design, Opticos Design, which is a landscape and urban design firm, and a local government commission and outreach firm. So we drew upon all of the innovative ideas from the 3 firms and best practices in the field of planning, engineering, and urban design, and pulled that into the plan as well. So the plan goals are to improve safety for all users, enhance access, promote a cohesive streetscape, and also support economic activity. So these goals really came from the feedback that we got from the community throughout the planning process. The plan includes a review of existing conditions. So this here is a cross-section of the current existing conditions. So the recommendations that are in the plan work within this same right-of-way. So this just gives you a sense. Currently, there's a sidewalk that's at the maximum is 10 feet, and then pull and angled parking at about 15 feet, and then about 15-foot travel lanes on both sides. The existing conditions also takes a look at the current conditions for walking and biking along the corridor, transit access, curbside activity, current streetscape elements, as well as an interest in supporting economic activity. So this is the proposed corridor design. It encompasses, like we said, Masonic to Tulare, so it's broken up into 3 pages in the plan. The main themes of the corridor design are to enhance safety of pedestrians, which is where you'll see we've restriped many of the crosswalks. We've enhanced mobility and accessibility by repositioning the curb ramps. There's also pedestrian refuge islands proposed for crosswalks that are quite lengthy. And we've also identified streetscape elements throughout. So possible new tree locations, as well as different flexible spaces that could be used for public spaces like parklets or buslets. They could be used for in-street bike corrals or motorcycle parking. So this is really an opportunity for different uses along the corridor in this area. This is a cross-section of the proposed intersection design. So at most of the intersection, or at all of the intersections, the design narrows to 11 feet. So this is the minimum width to accommodate bus travel and also large trucks, because Solano Avenue is a truck route. This also encompasses extending the curb ramp so that narrows the travel lane for pedestrians and limits the exposure time as they cross the street, which hopefully limits their conflict with cars. And then we also look to widen the sidewalk throughout the study area, especially on the south side where there are many pinch points. This is the mid-block cross-section. So as you'll see here, we maintain the 15-foot travel lane and keep the parking, and the thought here is that the 15-foot travel lane provides some extra buffer for as people are backing out. It provides cars some extra space to maneuver around parked cars who may be pulling out. So we're also really excited to include a whole assortment of corridor elements that really touch on safety and accessibility, streetscape amenities, curbside uses, and stormwater management. So I'm going to touch on a couple here, but just keep in mind that there are, of course, more than I go through here. So one of the corridor elements that we really highlight are public spaces. So this image on the right-hand side is of a possible new public space at Key Route Boulevard. So in that location, we propose the rerouting of Key Route, which then opens up a really nice space that could be used for a park or, other kind of gathering place. We also identify other places for public spaces throughout the corridor. We also identify the opportunities for murals or green walls. So these are currently blank walls that could be brought to life through murals from local artists, or could have green or living walls installed upon them to sort of enliven Solano Avenue and bring a lot of character to the corridor. We've also identified flexible spaces throughout the corridor. So when you look at the corridor design, we encourage you to keep in mind that the spaces allocated for vehicle parking could also be used as flexible spaces for on-street buslets or parklets, similar to what's outside of Hal's Coffee in Lower Solano Avenue. They could also be used for outdoor dining at popular restaurants. And in addition, they could be connected to bus stops and have some really nice amenities there. These examples below are examples of creative public spaces. And the one with the books is actually a creative bus stop. So you can use the space in a lot of different ways. I touched on this, that we can use the space for buslets and parklets. And then sidewalk improvements are a key element of this plan as well. So this is on the south side of Solano Avenue. You'll see, as I mentioned, there's many pinch points. And then also in many locations, there are places where the trees have really uprooted the sidewalk and caused tripping hazards and create difficulties for people with mobility impairments. So the city is also in tandem, with this project, working on a tree inventory. So there the certified arborist has been hired to look at the different types of trees on Solano Avenue and to provide feedback on which trees may be candidates for removal or which trees should remain, and in other instances, what would be ideal kind of urban streetscape trees to plant in the future. We also address bicycle facilities in the proposed plan. So the interest or the policy guidance that the city has provided through the general plan and the active transportation plan is that bicycle facilities should be accommodated on Marin Avenue and Washington Avenue, both parallel to Solano. And so our plan really focused on providing bicycle amenities across Solano Avenue. So at Peralta Ave and Curtis, those are both identified bike routes. We have proposed enhancements such as rectangular rapid flashing beacons. So that's in the top right-hand picture is a picture of a beacon in Berkeley. And so this provides enhanced visibility for bicyclists as they cross Solano Avenue. We also have identified different locations with the flexible spaces for in-street corrals, in-street bike corrals. So you'll see a photo of that down below as well. For parking, the current design increases the number of parking spaces. This is largely due to an analysis from AC Transit in which they recommend the removal of 3 bus stops. These are stops that do not have high numbers of boardings or alightings, and so we're able to capture those and can use them in a variety of ways. They can be used for regular vehicle spaces. We've also added 4 accessible vehicle spaces, including 2 van accessible spaces and 13 of these flex spaces. So these are all new additions to the corridor. There's also been a lot of conversation about the possibility of exploring back-end angled parking as a part of this plan. And the feedback that city staff received from the city council is that this is an element that can be considered as a part of the next stage of design work. So right now, this is very much a concept design. So in order to implement this plan, it would need to move forward to engineering design. So that means that while all of these recommendations do fit within the right-of-way, that it would get a bit more technical before it could be implemented on the roadway. And so the city's interested in pursuing the possibility of a back-end angled parking demonstration to get more community feedback, as well as, and then that feedback could be incorporated into the next phase, which is the 30% engineering design phase. So some of the streetscape elements that we include as a part of the design palette are focused on just different aspects of creating a sense of place. So that's branding, public art and murals, and also different types of signage. So here's an example of one of the pages in the plan that really focuses on branding. We also have a lot of recommendations around sidewalks and public spaces. So here's the design palette for bus stops, as well as rain gardens. There are many locations throughout the corridor that are identified in green on the corridor design, and these are spaces that could be landscaped, which is sometimes can be expensive to maintain. So there's also opportunities for rain gardens, which provide some really high quality stormwater management, but also aren't as expensive to maintain as fully landscaped medians and that kind of thing. For the roadway design section of the design palette, we provide some examples of pedestrian refuge islands. So throughout the corridor, these are proposed to, as we talked about, to limit pedestrian crossing distances and exposure. And so here are some examples of different types of pedestrian refuge islands. We also recommend the use of truck aprons. So these are raised, paved areas at intersections. They're quite uncomfortable for personal vehicles to mount and when turning, but they're no problem for larger trucks or emergency vehicles. And so these are recommended for locations where we see high truck volume or mainly where we see high truck volume. So we've used a system called auto turn to analyze whether or not trucks can make this turn, and they are able to make this turn with this addition of the truck aprons. So what this does is it serves to slow down and acts as a traffic calming element for motorists mainly. So as a part of the implementation strategy, there is a strong recognition amongst city staff that these improvements are, while they're very exciting, that they can take time and funding. And so we have a whole section dedicated on different implementation strategies. So this looks at how can you take the ideas in the plan and implement them in the short, medium, and long term. So this example is actually of a curb extension. And so you can see in the first example that you can use paint to delineate space on the street, and then you can transition over to paving and then into a permanent paved curb extension. So this provides some really good ideas about how to implement some of these recommendations without having a high price tag right out the gate. We also look at different funding opportunities and emphasize the importance of coordination amongst both internal and external organizations and agencies and departments. So to give you a sense of where we are and where we're headed, the public comment period is currently open on the draft plan. It opened on the 11th, as Ann mentioned, and will close on the 11th, so we have a month of public comment. So we encourage all community members to provide comments to city staff about the plan, as well as commissioners. So don't feel like tonight's your only time to share your feedback. And as I mentioned, we'll be going forward to the Traffic and Safety Commission, and then the plan is tentatively scheduled to be reviewed by the council on the 15th. So after the plan is adopted, like I mentioned, this is very much a concept design. So the corridor design will really need to move forward into an engineering design, and this is very typical for planning projects like this. The city has an example of the San Pablo Avenue plan is very similar, where it started with concept design and is moving to engineering phase. So that the city will be working on securing funding to pay for the engineering design work, and so that will be the next step in this process. So the plan can currently be found on the Solano CompleteStreets.org webpage, and this is also, of course, Ann's contact information. You can send comments her way. So thank you very much.
I just want to add briefly, there were also 2 items of correspondence that we received today that we forwarded to you as part of the plan review tonight.
Any commissioners have any questions?
We have questions. Okay, no. Can we do questions of staff now and then maybe comments on the plan later? Or how should we do it? Something. Okay. I think I have one question for you to start out with. I didn't see anything in the draft plan about the condition of the underground utilities along this stretch of Solano. And I think back to when the lower Solano was done, and I believe the driver for that was the need to replace the sewer. And that may not be the case here, but it'd be nice to see something in here or to know something about that. And that could also affect, funding and timing of things if either water lines or sewer lines or I don't know what else, most of the others are on the side, but if anything down the center of these blocks needs to be dug up and replaced, how might that affect implementation of the plan?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. So because this is a concept design, it sounds like, as you know, that we didn't really dive as deeply into whether or not different utilities would have to be moved, because that's really done as a part of the engineering. However, we have identified where those utilities are.
Okay.
And so we have a map that looks very similar to this, but it's an existing conditions map, and it
Okay.
overlays the location of those utilities.
Okay.
I would have to double check if it's in the existing conditions report. If it's not, we can add it in, but city staff definitely has a copy of the map, and so that will be something that will be a major consideration for the first phase of the engineering work. Yes, but I'll make a note to see if that's in the existing conditions report.
Okay. One other question I have, maybe it's a comment on the plan. I'll come back after the public's had a chance to speak then. Yeah.
Not real questions.
I just had a quick question on sort of process. So after this plan ultimately gets adopted by the city council and you guys go forward, do engineering, all of that, how does the implementation then start? So assuming you get funding for some phase or portion of it, and you obviously work through the very specific details of choosing which aspects of the design palette and features are going to get packaged together. Once you have sort of a package, does it come through us? Does it go to traffic and safety, city council? Like, what's the
Yeah,
process
it
for
would most
implementation?
likely go through traffic and safety and then ultimately to council.
Got it. Okay. Any other questions? All right. No other questions. We'll open it up to the public. Do any members of the public have comments on the plan? If so, please come on up to the podium. Okay. Seeing that, back to the commission.
Okay.
I guess public hearing is
Who
closed.
wants to start?
Yeah.
I'll start with I guess I can start with a few things, and I have some notes here, too. So the first question I had is, on the cross-sections at the intersections, you're showing 11-foot traffic lanes, 2 11-foot traffic lanes. Is that what we have on Lower Solano, or are those 12 feet?
That is an excellent question. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I can get that answer
Yeah,
for
It
you.
would be good to know
Yeah.
that, and, because I'd like to know if there's going to be, if we do this, if there'll be a change that we'll see or feel as we cross Masonic.
Excellent.
And
Mhm. Yeah, I
so
can
is
look into
that,
that.
is that a similar thing there? All right. So I guess I have some pages as well, maybe some other comments, little things here. On page 23, it says more information is coming about the tree inventory, and is that,
Yeah, I'm sorry that we didn't have that in there. We actually worked with an outside arborist consultant, so we're still awaiting the results of
waiting on that,
their
yeah,
inventory.
okay.
I mean, I can tell you at a high level, I think those trees which have caused the most damage to the sidewalks and compromise are probably not going to stay. And- Yeah.
And so are you thinking of then a list of the trees and identification of the trees and ones that would probably be removed and ones that would stay? You think that'll be able to get in the plan
Yeah,
before the council level?
Oh,
or-
it would definitely be in the plan before the council
That'll be
level.
good. That'd be good to know for all of us to know. Okay. I like your initial design, and I like the idea of what you're doing at Key Route, moving it from a boulevard with a wide median to one. I think it'll make the intersection with Sonic much more usable. But my concern is implementation of that. I think that's going to come later, and that would probably, I'd say to staff anyway, that should be a separate project in its own, because I think the Veterans Memorial we have there and the flag, I don't know if they're WPA or if they're not. I don't think they are, but they're early Albany.
I think it's, I know the shrine that's there is affiliated with the Lions Club.
The Lions Club, too.
Yeah.
I don't know when it was done. But that being said, it's probably not something we want to tear down.
No.
And it would have to be integrated, and I've stood out there and looked at it, and well, how are you going to integrate that? How's this going to work? It's without having it seem like it's going to be it's now symmetrically positioned between the two streets of the boulevard. And so I think there'd be some real design issues and some real interesting challenges that the public, all of us should see. It's going to create some very creative design to make that work. And I see that as a concern of mine. If it's not done right, it won't work.
I totally agree with you, and we have a sentence in the plan that speaks to that, that says that the new open space will seamlessly integrate with the existing Veterans Memorial space, because we really wanted to capture that thought that the Veterans Memorial shouldn't be removed, or that it should remain as is.
Yeah, good.
So it's a great point.
Good, good, okay, all right. What else do I have here? Yeah. Sounds like it might be talking for some new traffic signals too in here. Yeah, okay, that's not cheap to do that. Add that in here. I'm looking at some of the word language there, so. I'm really pleased to see that you've gained the 16 parking spaces. And I'll make comments that kind of also relate to the project we have tonight on 904 Masonic, which Masonic is now on my radar here. And I say to Ann and to staff, it kind of goes back to the bicycle master plan, our transportation plan. Should Masonic be a bike route? And where, since it is just 30 feet away from the Albany Greenway? People bike it, I bike it, sometimes I bike it a lot. Sometimes I prefer to go on the street, sometimes I go on the Greenway. But we've now learned from comments we had on 904 tonight that when it was turned into a bike route and the sharrows were put in there, that we lost 6 parking spaces. And then I'm not sure how it extends, but I don't think those sharrows go on down to Washington and Portland and Brighton. But I think that whole question needs to be reevaluated, and it's probably for a matter for traffic and safety. But do we really need to have the bike path, this on-street bike path be right next to the Albany Greenway? Then maybe we shouldn't. And then take a look at another design for Masonic. And I think parking in that area is important because there's no homes there. It's a double-loaded street. It's like a city-provided parking lot. And I know that a lot of employees of the businesses on Solano use it that way because they're not subject to tickets after 90 minutes. And so on Key Route Boulevard, we have a similar thing with that. And, that's where we provide our parking lot for the high school and for businesses on Solano. So I think parking on Masonic is something, I think we should look at that. I like that you've looked at loading zones and unloading zones. I think I'd like to go out and look and see in the field. I didn't have time to go walk and see where these are, but I'm really pleased that your team went out and looked for those because that's something we don't have very well done right now, and we have a lot of double parking on Solano, which causes a lot of people a lot of consternation. So that could help. Let's see. I had a question for you on page 43.
Okay.
Sorry, Chris is not here. On design considerations, what are suspended pavement systems for tree roots? You're talking about integrating the trees in here. It's not a jargon or a phrase I've ever heard of before, and there's some special ways of dealing with street trees and that make them more acceptable. I don't know.
You're asking very excellent questions. To be completely honest, our partner Opticos Design worked on this section, and
Okay.
so this is not necessarily my area of expertise, but I can get more information for you about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds great. It sounds like something we might need, and any expertise we can have, I think, on how to get trees in here without destroying or minimizing destruction of the sidewalks is great. That's one of the big problems that triggered this whole effort, I think. Okay. What else do I have here? That might be all. That might be it. Oh, let's see. That was good, okay. Yeah, the back and angled parking, I'll comment on that too. And I'll say that I'm skeptical about it. I'm probably not in favor of it, but I'm old and, slow to change my ways. But I understand from talking to other people, strollers and rollers people and everything, that the statistics say it's safer for bicyclists, and there's fewer, it's safer for bicyclists. My counter to that is that this is not a bicycle route. Solano, we have parallel ones on Marin and Washington, even though I bike down Solano a lot, but, be cautious, and probably other people do too. So in a way, trying back-end angle parking here would be, to me, is sort of a solution in search of a problem. I think that you'd have to change everybody's habits. Everybody drives more. Many more people drive than bike, and many of us drive on Solano as well as bike on Solano. We'd all have to learn how to drive differently. And unless it takes off and we start seeing it all around here in other places. I've only seen it in a few places. I tried it up in Windsor, and it felt a little awkward to me, but it might work. There's Preston walked in right there. He would have comments on this. But so anyway, I'm not excited about the idea, and it maybe is something you're deferring to the future. And the other thing that's happening as new cars are coming out with technology that warns people when things are coming behind you, that is making backing in and out of parking spaces a lot safer. And I live near the high school, and my new car picks up, our middle school picks up kids biking to work from my driveway when they're out in the street. It picks them up when they're a couple hundred feet away. And so the new technology is really helping cars. And so I'm not excited about learning how to have to back my car into parking spaces, and I'm not sure the great benefits from that would be great. So those are just my comments on that issue. And I know that it's not resolved and remains to be discussed community-wide. Okay, I think that's all. Those are my comments. It's a really nice plan, and I think you did a great job. There's some great ideas here, and I'd love to see it implemented right away. I actually think it's pretty good that it looks like we could implement this in segments as we might find funding, or as it becomes a priority for the council, or as we have funding. That's a big challenge for staff, I think, and for the city council to decide, well, what comes first? What do we do first? And how fast we go on this. But I like the plan, and I'd like to see a lot happen quickly. Those are my comments.
Do you want to go?
Sure. I have a completely different take on this. I look at it, partly from the point of view of an active cyclist and somebody who's promoting cycling, and also from the point of view of somebody who has a lot of environmental concerns. And just judging from the definition of complete streets and what the goals are, I just don't see this project really achieving it when it comes to cycling. It certainly addresses pedestrian needs. But if the goal is to make our streets safe for cyclists of all ages and abilities, I think this is really falling short. I have just a completely different design idea. I would prefer to see protected bike lanes on this street. I think Solano should be one of the main cycling corridors for the city of Albany. I look at the active transportation plan, and that's meant to discourage automobile use, encourage other modes of transportation, other active modes, such as cycling, scooters, what have you, walking. I don't see this plan addressing that issue. I also look at it from the point of view of the city's climate action plan, reducing greenhouse gases. And I don't see this plan addressing that really in any meaningful way. I don't know how we're going to get to our climate action plan goals if we don't start taking some major steps. In fact, the next climate action plan is supposed to be getting us to what I read as decarbonization goals. And I think overall we need to start looking at things a little differently. I also look at future developments, bike share, scooter share. How is that going to be impacting this? Ride sharing, car ride sharing is going to make a big difference. It already has started making a big difference in terms of what future needs for parking will be, and also automated vehicle design is changing and coming, and maybe in not very long from now, it's going to have a major impact on these kind of zones and areas that we may not need so much parking. So I have a completely different take. I see a lot of families on Solano trying to ride with their kids. It doesn't look very safe. If you go to the slide that shows the cross section with the 80-foot right-of-way, the one that has the I'll on this one in a minute, but yeah, that one. Basically, I see automobile use as dominating 60 feet, right? Kind of marginally allowing cyclists there in between the trucks, buses, cars, and autos backing in and out, in a not very safe cycling path. And what I see is just a not very equitable distribution of the transportation space. I think complete streets would lead to something that would be much more, much more equitable between bicyclists and car space. And for me, that would mean taking the diagonal parking, making it parallel parking, and putting the protected bike lane next to the sidewalk. You definitely have room here for a 10-foot sidewalk, a 5 or 6 foot protected bike lane, 2-foot buffer, an 8-foot parking space, and a 10 or an 11 or 12-foot travel lane. And that would be the design I would like to see up and down Solano Avenue, all the way from Berkeley, top of Berkeley, down to Jackson Street and connect with UC Village and Ocean View School. And I think that would provide a great path of travel for all our residents, make Solano Avenue safer for families and children. The other aspects, I just think it would be much better in terms of promoting a zero carbon transportation option, which would help us get to our climate action plan goals. I have a major concern about the pedestrian islands. Can you go to the slide with the pedestrian islands, the cross section, please? If I'm a cyclist and then I am competing for road space in these areas, I think it's really very, very dangerous for cyclists. If you put a bicycle in that, diagram, there's really, you're between a rock and a hard place if you're a cyclist and you happen to come to one of those pedestrian islands at the same time as a big truck. I came down Solano on my bike the other night. I was followed by a semi-truck from Andronicos, or what was Andronicos. And, it's a little nerve-wracking when you got that big truck behind you. And the fact that Solano is a major truck access point for all of Solano, all the way up to markets at the top, I think, so for me, it just says that protected bike lanes are the way to go. That's really my major set of comments, and that's kind of me, in a way, it's really trying to rethink the whole thing. So, that's what I would say.
So the last time you were here, I remember I had a question about this last point that Commissioner McLeod was making about the intersections being it looked to me like it would be a choke point. And I'm someone who rides a bike, but not like all the time. And so I'm not sure how more serious cyclists think about this stuff. But there was someone in the audience that evening who I believe, who wasn't necessarily speaking on behalf of strollers and rollers, but I believe was affiliated with them. Does this ring bells for anybody else? Who was like, oh, well, that's not really the concern because, really, if you're a more serious cyclist, you're going to be taking up the whole lane. Or like, this was my takeaway from it. So I'm not, that's not to discount this point because I had the same question, but I walked away from that meeting thinking like, well, maybe that isn't really such a concern with these pedestrian islands. But I think it is something that maybe continues to warrant more consideration or at a minimum explanation about how that would work with multiple users in the intersections. I think overall, I like the plan a lot. I think there's a lot of great stuff in here. I think, I understand where the commissioner is coming from in terms of, what should be the goals of complete streets plan. I also think if we were really to talk about, getting rid of or even cutting like in half or even a third the amount of parking on Solano, I think there would be a revolt from business owners and probably residents in the surrounding neighborhoods. And I don't think that the direction that the city council gave in, starting the process for this was to, my sense was not that we were being asked to do something radical, but to make, incremental changes to improve the streetscape for a number of users. And I do think that this plan goes a long way toward doing that. One thing that I really like is the inclusion or the thought that's being given to flex spaces within the parking areas. So designating some of those areas for more flexible public uses of different types. And that, that's something that I think over time, we're kind of in this transitional period right now where a lot of people think we're on the cusp of, moving away from the single, vehicle trips as the primary mode of transportation. And like, as we get closer to autonomous vehicles or rideshare or whatever becoming more prevalent, I think there may be a desire to look more seriously at converting what is currently designated for parking. And I like that this plan is building in flexibility to do that and think about some of those areas differently. One thing I would like to see or at least hear if this has been considered, is inclusion of electric vehicle charging at any point along the street. And I know those are usually like being sponsored by individual businesses. I don't know what the funding looks like to make these work, but it is something that I think is good to consider at a minimum. Let's see, just a couple other comments that I'll try to get through quickly. One is, so I was curious about the bus stop locations that are shown on here. Are those all like existing AC Transit bus stop locations?
Yes, the ones in the project map or on the corridor design?
Yeah. I'm looking at like these, sorry.
Yes, that's right. These are where the existing bus stops are. We did not, our recommendations for the bus stops on Solano Ave mirror AC Transit's analysis of the corridor. So the ones that are shown here are the ones that would stay, and they aren't moving locations.
Okay. And I think maybe I'm just having a hard time envisioning how they work right now, but I think like, especially if we're putting in these pedestrian islands, where you have a bus stop that's on like the far side of an intersection, I just picture that creating a lot of backup through the intersections and creating like cross-flow problems. I'm sure there are people who understand traffic engineering a lot better than I do, who have thought about these things, and there may be an easy answer to that, but that's the thing that jumps out at me. And so I know it's not up to the city to determine where AC Transit puts its bus stops, but to the extent that like that is a part of the overall planning, I think, you know, there may be opportunities to perhaps like work with AC Transit on realigning some of those bus stops if there's a potential for causing traffic problems. One of the things that came up in one of the comment letters that we received was a concern about like in the interest of trying to shorten the distance in crossing the street, like creating the shortest possible right angle distance, it might be creating zigzag traffic patterns for pedestrians. And, you know, that's something that I think exists in it exists now along Solano, and I never noticed it until I started like pushing a stroller up and down the street, and then I was like, oh my God, these, you know, for people who have mobility issues, especially, it's like the streets, the curbs really point you in funny directions, and I think a lot of this is trying to address those issues, but I do think, you know, just looking at it, at least from the bird's eye view, there are a lot of places where it seems like pedestrians will be routed in not the most natural ways. And so I'm curious if consideration was given to, you know, any more diagonal crossings, or, you know, if the goal is really to prioritize the shortest possible distance for pedestrians, I guess I get why you wouldn't do that, but.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So a lot of this is that these streets, when they were designed in an interesting way so that they are not on a grid, which creates these zigzag patterns for pedestrians because of where how the intersections line up, of course. So in our best professional judgment, we're very interested in limiting the amount of exposure time for pedestrians. So that's like a jargony way of saying we want to reduce the amount of time that people are in the crosswalks as much as possible, because that's where the collisions happen and that's where the danger points are. And so with this design, we did not recommend diagonal crossings, and that's because diagonal crossings, now they may not add a ton of extra feet, but they do add extra space that pedestrians are in the crosswalks, which puts them out in front of cars longer. Also, diagonal crossings are most recommended at signalized or stop signed intersections. So that means that intersection, well, I mean, y'all know what that means, but with either a traffic sign or a stop sign. There are only 2 intersections like that on the corridor, and that's at Santa Fe and Masonic. So we don't typically recommend diagonal crosswalks when it's free flow of traffic, because the sight lines can be reduced for the drivers to see people. And it's also kind of, yeah, they might not be expecting a pedestrian to be coming from this angle, but of a more parallel crosswalk is considered more natural as well. The long and short of it is we want to keep people out of the road as long as we want to keep people out of the road and reduce their crossing times, and so that's why it does result in a zigzag. But we feel like it's safer for folks to take that curve on the sidewalk rather than in the middle of the street.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for that explanation. I don't think I was asking in a very coherent way, but you answered.
I read that email,
clearly,
so I knew exactly the question you were asking.
Yeah, the question I was getting
Yes.
at. Thank you. Okay, just one more. I guess this is sort of a question, and I feel like I should have a better handle on this, but can staff or the consultant team talk us through what is the ownership of the sidewalks along Solano? I mean, I know that when we say that the city has the right of way, like that could either mean that the city actually owns the property, or that private property owners own the property, but the city has like access rights over the sidewalk. And I guess I'm asking mostly because I'm just curious, as this gets implemented, like, you know, how much do you have to coordinate with the individual property owners along the street, or, you know, are there other rights that that the city has to acquire in order to do things to the sidewalk on Solano? Or?
No, it's a public right of way, so we would fix the sidewalks accordingly. And you've probably seen some of the sidewalks being fixed in the corridor, obviously independent of this, to prevent tripping hazards, fix sidewalks that have been badly compromised. So we have gone through a process where, certainly we do outreach and we let people know that those improvements are forthcoming. But the city takes on that initiative.
Okay, so that's not a barrier to implementation of sidewalk improvements.
There's even a funny detail there. Some of the streets at the eastern end, the sidewalk is Albany's and the building is in Berkeley.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah, if you are ever up at Barney's, you don't pay to park in front of Barney's, even though the business is technically in Berkeley. The on-street parking, the sidewalks, that's all in the city of Albany.
Fascinating.
As is the sewer infrastructure. So if those businesses need to upgrade sewer lines, they come to us.
Okay. I'm good. Thanks.
Sure. Just have a few additional comments. I agree with a lot of what my fellow commissioners have said, but I guess when I first reviewed this, and I think I wasn't here for the last presentation, so a bit of this was new, but I did attend one of the walking design charrettes that started at Flowerland, and really enjoyed that process. It was very well attended, especially for being midday, or fairly early in the day. But sort of taking a step back on this, especially with some of the comments about sort of biking and parking and sort of the competing interests that we look at as part of this plan, I kind of take a step back to what do we want Solano to be? And from, at least in my perspective, from a placemaking perspective, Solano is not sort of this major arterial. I mean, I know it functions in that way for a lot of people, but in terms of, I think, what we all have talked about through other discussions we've had about here in terms of the sense of placemaking, this is our main street. This is a place where we want people to want to be outside, to want to be on the sidewalks, to want to sit in outdoor cafes if there's space. Look at the success of the parklet in front of Hal's and how well used that is. Really wanting to make it a place that people want to linger, not just traverse through. And so to me at least, with sort of that sort of macro perspective, sort of contrasting that to Marin Avenue, for example, where you just want to get down it and we've needed some traffic calming measures, that to me sort of puts the perspective in about what types of features we should be looking at, how we should be designing our sidewalks, our curbs, our parking, and our travel lanes. And so with that in mind, I feel like sort of the tone and the spirit that you guys have set forward in this is very much on point. And I think you've done a lot of things that incorporate a lot of the best practices that we're seeing in good streetscape design. Again, with when those are sort of the intent of the space. The bulb outs, I don't have any concern with any of that, and the sort of thumbnails and median and greening and all of that good stuff. I did have a comment at least about the crosswalks. I think it would be worthwhile. I know there was some discussion about incorporating, or the possibility of incorporating, raised or differentiated paving of the crosswalks. I do think that's something that should be done strategically, but I do think it's a good selection. I mean, I don't think you want it at every single crosswalk, but I think incorporating some of that on Solano would be definitely a positive. In terms of the conversation about back-in parking, I very much concur with Commissioner Donaldson on some of the concerns. I feel like my mother would probably kill me if she heard me saying this on TV, but I'm just thinking about her backing in. She hates backing up in parking and parallel parking. And she would never, ever go out on Solano if she had to back into a parking space on Solano. I can pretty much guarantee, and she has a backup camera in her car. So I do agree that I think some of those things just may be a best practice, but may not be the most pragmatic. But as maybe an alternative, I did see that some of the proposals that were laid out were, through paving or through sort of rainwater collection things to do sort of a differentiated strip that breaks between where the angled parking is and where the travel lane is, to give that feeling of a buffer and sort of a protectedness, if you will, where, cars may slow down or be a little bit more cautious about not, jamming through that. And I think all of those types of, again, best practices are all great ideas to be incorporating. On the bike and scooter corral idea, I think it would be great. I am not admittedly a heavy biker, but I have, especially now that I've for many years lived in San Francisco and certainly didn't need a car hardly at all. And now that I'm over here in Albany and need a car a little bit more, I do take transit to work every day. And it is sometimes that quarter mile or that half mile sort of to and from the ends of your commute that sometimes I wish I did have a resource of, a scooter or a bike, jump share that was convenient on either end. And so I think just thinking through, again, I think there needs to be some thought and some strategy to where those are located. Obviously, if they're just on Solano, it doesn't do a whole lot of good because you need someone to be able to pick it up at a to and from location on either end. But I think for the city to kind of think through a plan about where those should be so that we're not experiencing the same issues that San Francisco is experiencing, where they're just littering the sidewalks and causing other, pedestrian and bike conflicts, if you will. I think would be good to be a little more proactive about here's where they are, here's where they need to be put away, that sort of thing. And I concur also with the electric vehicle charging, kind of thinking through all of those things so that we're ahead of the game rather than playing catch up as part of creating this plan would be great. In terms of the park at Masonic, I really like the rerouting. I think it creates a nice space and again, brings it back to looking at placemaking rather than just thoroughfare for the cars. I do think one really important part of that though is the sort of devil in the detail of the execution of how that park is planned. With it being adjacent to at least the current business that's there, being a laundromat, it's not the most natural partnership of activation of that space. Obviously that business may or may not, be there in the foreseeable future, but I feel like those spaces tend to be much more successful when they have that partner private business adjacent to it. And so I think thinking through what that activation partner, who that is or what that is, and maybe it doesn't need to be sort of the brick and mortar business next door, but some other thought through plan, I think would be helpful. Because I think up to the little, I don't know what the name is, but the little mini park across from 7-Eleven that no one seems to really have ownership of. And I'll tell you, somebody who grew up in Albany, it was just a place that high school kids did things they shouldn't have been doing at night, probably. And so I think having a place that actually has, again, some intent and some placemaking in addition to, children play area or things like that, I think would be good to start thinking through in terms of that park and programming. And then lastly, my sort of final comment is on the additional parking capacity, at least that could be gained by the removing of the bus stops and introducing sort of opportunities for activation and parklets. I do think sort of that balance is nice rather than just saying, hey, we gained 16 spots, great, we get extra 16 spots. I think to be able to almost use that pool as a pool to bring in new parklets or other public activation so that it can be a little bit of a win-win where there may not be an overall loss of parking on Solano, but we can still gain some of these spaces, I think would be great. I think, the activation, I think there's some really neat opportunities, especially in Albany, where I feel like we have a very much of a sort of a creative spirit and culture of here of opportunities to be able to partnership with the schools, of doing, design competitions or things like that with the murals or within the parklets or some of those sort of pop-up activations. Like I know in San Francisco in front of, I think it's the 16th Street, oddly, at BART Station, they have a ping pong table that's just out there in the right of way that people are able to do. I think there's some really neat things that are going on right now in terms of public space activation. And it could be a great program in and of itself to, I don't know, do some sort of design competition with the schools or something like that. So I think there's a lot of great opportunities to really, again, bringing it back to what's the purpose of Solano, a sense of placemaking and really a sense of community where people want to hang out on Solano and not just pass through. So those are my thoughts. Thank you, guys. Is that it? All right. Well, with,
May I say one more?
yeah, absolutely.
I hear Commissioner McLeod's comments about the overall plan and it not being, it not being very bike-centric, and it's complete streets in a way. It's not bicycle-oriented, and I agree with that observation, and I'd say that the observation does not bother me. And the things that I really do like about the plan are the emphasis on the pedestrian-oriented activities or the pedestrian-oriented considerations and the sort of social aesthetic opportunities that we have here and that your team is uncovered for us and proposing for us. And I really do like that. And the fact that it's not a bike-centric plan, maybe make it a little less than a complete street in quotes, but that doesn't bother me. I'm comfortable with that. Okay.
Great. With that, we'll move along to item 7 then on our agenda. These are discussion and possible action on matters related to, the first item is 7-1, proposed code amendments to table 20.24.020, site regulations by district.
Yes, we are coming back to you tonight with the formal recommendation resolution that would go to City Council, amending the city's municipal code to effectively remove a footnote within the development standards table that establishes a minimum lot area based on unit. So at your last meeting, we provided you with a resolution of intention and identified that this lot area requirement based on the unit count actually limits the density that can be accommodated on an infill site. You have a project that's coming before you later tonight, and so that was where this issue had come up. Strictly using the development standards, you can achieve a certain building footprint, but that limitation with the lot area restricts the actual density that can go in there. So this is the formal action that if you adopt this resolution, we would schedule this for council review and simply eliminate that footnote and as development standard in the zoning code.
Well, I know oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say questions.
No, I was just going to launch into a comment, so I should wait.
Any questions before?
I do have a couple comments on it. Okay, we're getting there. We're close, but I do have some comments, and I may not be quite ready yet. As you've gone through and you've made the changes, and so I'm looking at the handouts that showing the revised tables, and on the first page you cross out foot 9 and put in not applicable. I don't think that's what we should do. I think we should have a number there. We have a minimum lot area per dwelling unit for R2 and for R4, and I think we should not just say not applicable. It won't make sense. People will looking at us 5 years from now and say, where'd that come from? How did that happen? They have numbers for the others. And so, and I think of Clay Larson's comments when he came the last time, and he said that means you would have no minimum lot area in the R3, and that someone might be able to come in and propose sort of a dormitory kind of housing like you get up around the campus. I've seen in Berkeley before, where you have living units that are really, really tiny. So
Just if I can add a little clarity on
sure.
that. All the other development standards apply, so the building height, floor area ratio, lot
Yeah.
coverage, and parking. So parking is still a determinant in, for better or worse, determining how much density can be accommodated on site.
Yeah.
This just, it's the way the code is written right now, if you apply the density, the minimum of 20 units and the maximum of 63 units, you get a range on a 3,750 square foot lot of 1.75 to about 5. But those upper numbers become ineffective essentially because you're bound by this lot area requirement. So the
Right.
idea is that you can get more units within the same building envelope, but it still has to comply with the other development standards,
Yeah.
including parking.
Yeah, I understand that, and just for the sake of continuity in how the code looks in drafts, I'd suggest we put in 770, which comes from the old table, and that's the amount, that would work on a 10,000 square foot lot, or go all the way down and do 690, which is at the bottom of the lot. Just so that if we have a minimum lot area per dwelling unit for some zoning districts, why would R3 be different than R2 or R4? We know it's not applicable in R1, and that's a whole different set of regulations. So just for continuity's sake, I think NA doesn't work for me there. And then my other comment is a general one, Ann. If we're eliminating footnote 9, we need to renumber the other footnotes, that after that, and revise the tables so that I think there are footnotes 10 through 18, 19, or 19.
Could I make a suggestion on that? You can just say, this is what you do when you're revising a contract and you take a provision out. You just say reserved. Like, it's just a section 9 that doesn't say anything.
Easy, wouldn't it?
It would minimize the damage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or intentionally omitted.
Intentionally omitted or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Sure, that could work. Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know, I've been there. I know when I worked on this in 2004, we had that happen. Several times we'd have to go through and renumber a whole bunch of footnotes. So I like your idea. Yeah. Okay. So those are my comments. And otherwise, I understand what's going on, and I'm comfortable with it. But the anomaly of having that NA in there for the R3 without any explanation bothers me. And I'd say we could put a number in there that would work just fine. And so.
Can I ask
Not
a
very
question of staff about that? Because as I look at this, I mean, I think there is something to the idea that maybe it's strange to have a number for some districts and not others. And I'm totally on board with the intent of this amendment. But I'm curious if staff looked at just getting rid of this minimum lot area per dwelling unit square footage entirely, so we don't have, like, just deleting this whole table, because I think we still have the density, the overall lot area setbacks, FAR, parking, that are otherwise restricting the envelope, and I'm not sure it makes sense to keep that number for R2 and R4, but not the other districts.
Yeah, if you just direct us to do so, we'd be happy to
Okay,
restrict
but
that.
I guess I wanted to check with you if there wasn't, if you were like, we thought about this and it's a bad idea, because
No,
I would
we-
like to hear that, but, okay.
We focus primarily on this
On the table.
R3 issue.
Okay.
Any other questions before we open it for public comment? The commissioners? Okay, great. With that, we'll open it up for public comment. Does anyone have public comment on this item? Seeing none, the public comment is closed. Turn it back here. Do you have comments?
I have just one other comment, which is on the draft resolution. I think so. It looks good overall, but the third whereas on the draft resolution, I think something broke down in the drafting, and so I was just hoping we could review that and clean up the language. Right now it says, whereas recent review of this code provision revealed an inconsistency between maximum allowable density residential development applications has required clarification and review of code intent for this section. So I guess I was just trying to think of how to revise this to, I think, express what the intent is, and I'm open to other suggestions on this, but I would suggest revising it to say, revealed an inconsistency regarding maximum allowable density for residential development applications, which has required clarification and review of code intent. So that's one possible way to maybe clean that up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
totally.
Basically, that clause is just indicating
Yeah.
the motivation
Right.
to revise this, where it starts.
And I'm just being nitpicky, so. And then I guess, yeah, just to circle back to the conversation a minute ago, I guess I would recommend that we just,
So,
Strike out the.
well, that it was, if I could, I'll just say this. I would just recommend that rather than deleting only footnote 9, that we delete, I guess it's not the entire table, right? It's the portion of table 2A 20.24.020 that relates to minimum lot area per dwelling unit in square feet. I would just recommend that we strike that entire portion of the table and look to all of the independent controls on density that already apply throughout the residential districts.
yeah, I may be okay with that. Ann, let me ask you this, though, with that. Is there any, and you think of any scenario from what you know here where a developer could come in with a project with very small units, really small units? And that's what we're trying, that's one of the things we're trying to avoid here. And I do agree from the other analysis is that we were, when this was originally done, and when we revised the code in 2004, we were looking to encourage lot consolidation, which hasn't worked, didn't happen. That was what was kind of get a benefit, a bonus for consolidating lots. That hasn't happened. But I'm still nervous about someone being able to come in with really small units. So can you comment on that?
Yeah. I think in the event that we did have an application for a micro-unit development or even studio apartments, there still is, the commission has discretion not only in terms of the design review, but also in regards to the parking. So, for example, if someone is working, developer has a confined site that has limitations on what can be accommodated on site, the commission is going to look through that through the use permit process. So you do have some discretion here where it's not a guaranteed approval, and you are looking at it from a 360 perspective.
Do we have a minimum square footage requirement for a dwelling unit in Albany?
The building code has basic,
Building code
Yeah.
does,
is it
okay.
like 220
Building
square
code is
feet or something?
220, yeah.
Building code is what, 220?
220.
Uh-huh.
Commissioner, do you have any comments?
Just following along, I agree with the intent of what we're trying to do. Sometimes when we make these changes, sometimes it's a law of unintended consequences comes about, so it's good to try to think it all through. I have no objection to Commissioner Jackie proposal to change the wording, for example. And then I'm just curious about your thinking about micro units. You don't think it's a good thing to have micro units, or what?
Actually, I don't know if I do or not. I've thought about that. How small could I go before it would be,
But Doug, I don't think that this even controls for micro units, because this is about the lot size. Like, this doesn't,
Right.
like, you could have a 3,500 square
Lot
foot
area.
lot.
That's right.
And you could put, like, nothing in our codes right now says that you can't put a 300 square foot unit on it.
that's right.
Or 10 of those, right? Like, that you can do that now.
Right.
This is the minimum, it's not, or the minimum lot area, it's not about minimum. I don't know, I think,
Dwelling unit.
I think
also
it's just kind of a
point
different
out,
issue.
We still have a, minimum unit and a maximum unit threshold in terms of dwelling units per acre. So it's a 20-unit
Yeah.
minimum and a
Right.
63 maximum. So that's another development standard control that comes into play.
Yeah.
Right.
And are we keeping that 20 for this zoning district? Or is that how
Yeah,
that
the
came up?
dwelling units per acre thresholds are not proposed to
So
change.
for SC and SPC, explain how that works. 20-unit minimum and 63 maximum, right? So explain how how you calculate the 20-unit minimum.
So I'm going to get slightly ahead of myself. But in the next staff report for 904 Masonic, we included a little analysis about how to calculate the minimum and maximum
That's right.
dwelling
That's why I
units
read
per
that,
acre
yeah.
density.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Well, I just had a few comments. I would be in supportive of just removing that entire line item across the board so that there's consistency. I agree with Commissioner Donaldson's comment that it feels a little awkward to pull it out for one and not the others, but I also don't see the value in keeping it, especially if sort of the genesis of that code section was to encourage the aggregation of lots. I actually think that's kind of counter to good planning policies now. I think it sort of disrupts the fine-grained character of what much of Albany is. So I'm supportive of that and for making your sort of language change in the resolution. So I don't have any other concerns.
So if we do that, we'll have then no minimum lot area per dwelling unit on any of the residential districts, but we'll have a minimum unit, 20-unit minimum, 20 unit per acre minimum on the SC and SPC. Is that good?
So we just wanted to
Okay.
give you the table that's actually in the upcoming staff report, just so you have this for context, so you can understand how the
Yeah.
density units per acre was calculated with the minimum and maximum
Right.
thresholds.
So let's see,
Sorry, can you talk us through what we're seeing here?
7.2 unit per acre.
Yeah, so basically, if you took a 3,750 square foot lot, your minimum density is 1.7 units per acre. That's the minimum. Your maximum is 5 units per acre, and then again, you still have all of these other development standards that you're looking at in terms of lot coverage, building height, floor area ratio, off-street parking.
And just to clarify, 2 questions. So one is when we round up, 0.5 and above, we round up in terms of the minimums. Is the point of that to make sure people don't underdevelop lots so that they don't put one huge single-family home on this lot? For example, you have to at least put 2 units on this lot? Or at least that's the result of it?
That would be the result of it.
Okay. And is there any discretion, or is that something that can be waived or modified by the commission, or is that like a black and white, you just have to
I think
comply?
in the context of your discretion, you would be able to work through that.
But there's a certain sort of certainty that somebody's coming in and says, here are my sort of bookends of density allowed on this site.
Exactly.
Got it.
And so, sorry, just to clarify, it's not actually 1.72 per acre. It's actually 1.72 per 3,750 square feet.
Correct.
Right? Okay. Okay. So yeah, so just on that lot, you would need to put
A minimum
2
of-
units, 2 to
You
5.
would have a minimum of 2 units on
Yeah.
that lot.
Okay.
for New development, yeah.
As the planning, or rather, or looking at it the other way, that you would be entitled by right to a minimum of 2.
Yeah, okay, well, I can see that, maybe you can say that's appropriate for the commercial districts, and having a minimum lot area per dwelling unit is not necessarily appropriate in the residential districts, right? You can say that. I mean, so if someone had a large lot in R3, and there are some, and they only want to put one home on it, that happens all the time. There are many lots, many R2 lots in Albany that have one home on them. Yeah.
And there's a spoiler alert, at the next meeting, you actually will have 2 duplex applications before you.
To duplex application.
Yeah, 2 different properties in town.
Okay. Would they be affected by any of this?
Can you have a motion?
Well, yeah, unless you have other comments, I think I'd like to,
I'm trying to get comfortable with where we're going. Okay, go for it.
I would like to move to, what is my motion? Move to recommend to the city council that we amend Table 2A 2024-020 to remove the minimum lot area per dwelling unit row from that table. And would also request the changes that I talked through to the resolution of intention, or resolution of recommendation, rather.
if I could amend that motion to add in and put reserved in for footnote 9. You want to do that, or something equivalent?
Amendment accepted.
Okay. Okay.
Do we have a second?
Yeah, okay, I'll
Okay.
second it. A
Great.
second.
All in favor, say aye.
Okay,
Aye.
Aye. All in opposition?
okay.
Nope. Great. That item passes 4-0. Recommendation to the City Council. That brings us on to item 7-2, design review and conditional use permit for a new mixed-use residential building at 904 Masonic.
Yes, good evening, Commission, members of the public. Once again, this is design review, planning application 18090, design review and conditional use permit for a new residential mixed-use building at 904 Masonic. Just as a reminder, you saw this project before you on the January 9th Planning and Zoning Commission hearing, and it's back to you tonight with revisions. I'll just dive in. Really quick, some background information on the property. The subject property is a 3,751 square foot lot with a 980 square foot single-story structure originally designed to be a single-family home in 1924. The building was used as a chiropractor's office from 1985 to present. The subject parcel is zoned Solano Commercial with the neighboring parcel to the south zoned R1. Some background continued. The project proposed for 904 Masonic was last seen at the Commission hearing on January 9th. At the time, the project was proposed to be a residential mixed-use building containing 4 residential units and a single commercial ground floor tenant space. Since the last review, staff has received an inquiry from an Albany resident highlighting the lot area per unit requirement contained in the aforementioned Table 2A of Section 2024-020 of the Albany Municipal Code. The code, once again, establishes a minimum dwelling unit per acre requirement of 20 units minimum and a maximum of 63 units per acre. For a 3,750 square foot lot parcel, this establishes a minimum of 1.72 units and a maximum of 5.04 units. The minimum lot area per unit requirement limits density to 3 units or 1,250 square feet of lot area per unit. And then once again, here's that same table of the density breakdown and also the conflict with the lot area requirement per residential unit in the zoning district. Staff verified that there is contradicting language and intention within the code. A strict interpretation limits the density for the proposed project to 3 units based on a 3,750 square foot lot. This existing restriction effectively limits the allowable project density. And then, not to overbeat this, but we'll dive right into Section 2024-020, Table 2B, site regulations, non-residential. There are 2 sets of requirements that contradict each other. One row calls out maximum density permitted in the Solano Commercial Zoning District, while the other calls out a minimum lot area per dwelling unit with reference to subnote 3. And then subnote 3 takes you to the residential table and to see subnote 9, which also indicates that the dwelling units are required to have 1,250 square feet of lot area or 3 units on a 3,750 square foot lot. And then just illustratively, this is how the table looks today. And then going back to that table, once again, 3 units on a 3,750 square foot lot. After notifying the applicant of the zoning code provisions affecting the project, the application has been revised to include a 3-unit scheme for the proposed project. This reduction in dwelling units brings the project into strict compliance with the zoning code. In addition to the unit reduction, the applicant has also addressed various commission comments expressed at the January 9th hearing. As you know, amendments for the density provisions in the zoning code have already been initiated by staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission. Should the changes be adopted by the City Council, the number of units that would be permitted in the SPC zones would be based on density minimums and maximums without further restriction. The current code limits the number of dwelling units permitted in the SC and SPC zoning districts based on a minimum lot area of lot area to unit threshold. However, the FAR setbacks, height limits are exactly the same. Thus, as the code reads today and is in the case with 904 Masonic specifically, the developer could build a 3-unit residential mixed-use building at a maximum build-out. However, they could not develop a 4-unit residential mixed-use building within the same exact building envelope due to the lot size restriction. The code is proposed to be amended and scheduled for City Council action to eliminate the lot area requirement. With that being said, the applicant intends to amend the application once the code change becomes effective to include a 4th residential unit. In the interim, they are pursuing this 3-unit scheme so that they may commence with the building permit plan check. If the code changes are adopted, the applicant will return to the Planning and Zoning Commission with an amended application and a request for a parking reduction to accommodate the 4th unit. The project request as presented to you tonight is design review for the residential mixed-use building and a conditional use permit solely for the stairwell projection on top of the roof. A street view of the property as it sits today. And here's the revised proposed elevation. And then here are some 3D renderings. This is the front corner of the proposed structure, the side, and then the rear, illustrating the parking and biking parking. Building programming. On the ground level, the commercial tenant space is proposed to be 1,391 square foot tenant space with a single ADA all-gender restroom, an entry lobby, stairwell to the dwelling units, off-street vehicle parking, bicycle parking, and trash receptacle storage. On the second level, it's proposed to be two residential units with each containing 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and will each be 752 square feet with private balconies. On the third level, 1 residential unit with 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a total of 1,504 square feet with 2 private balconies is proposed. And then lastly, on the roof level, an open rooftop deck with planters, outdoor furniture, barbecue is proposed and will be accessible to all residential tenants. There is still a usable open space requirement for the project. The zoning code requires that multifamily dwellings of 3 units or more provide 200 square feet of common usable open space per unit. The required common open space can be reduced by providing private open spaces for each unit. The applicant is proposing open space in the form of the rooftop deck. Each dwelling unit is proposed to provide a private open balconies, resulting in a reduction in the amount of total required rooftop deck area. And then here's just a plan view of the proposed deck and the balcony at the rear unit. Conditional use permit. The applicant is also seeking a conditional use permit to allow the stairwell projection to exceed the maximum height limit by 5 foot 3 inches. A conditional use permit is required for this type of projection to exceed the height limit in the zoning district, which is 35 feet. Height limits and exceptions in the stairwell projection, and then this is just the code section specifically calling out the stairwell projection provision. Parking, the required parking. So required parking for this project is as follows. The residential component dictates 1 vehicle space per dwelling unit and 1 bicycle space per unit. So 3 vehicle, 3 bikes. And the commercial component dictates no off-street parking for vehicle off-street parking, and 1 exterior bike rack is required to accommodate the commercial tenant space. And then here's that code section specifically calling out the ground floor retail area and the lack of parking needed for that. The first 1,500 square feet of ground floor retail is exempt from providing off-street vehicle parking. And then just once again in illustrative form, a table showing the proposed parking and what is required. As you can see, the applicant is technically providing an abundance of what is required in regard to bicycle parking. There's 4 bicycle parking spaces proposed for the residential units. And then project refinement, lastly, these refinements have been made in regard to the commission comments made on the January 9th hearing, and that includes a reduced dwelling unit count from 4 to 3 units, shifting the entire building to create a 5'11" front yard setback, which was previously 7 foot 5 inches. They added an additional covered bike parking space for a total of 4 parking spaces. An additional bike rack on the sidewalk was provided in front of the building on the public right-of-way. The interior ceiling heights have been modified to accommodate a 10-foot commercial ceiling height. The second and third floors and roof framing, the structural thickness has increased from 12 inches to 13 inches for engineering purposes. The rooftop staircase projects a maximum of 5 foot 3 inches above the height limit, which was previously proposed at 4 foot 5 inches. The revised north elevation is now to include a 1-inch stucco banding for architectural relief and complementary paint colors as well. By moving the entire building forward, the rear elevation was able to be modified to account for better seismic strength in structural design. Staff has received 2 correspondences, which was emailed to you guys earlier in the day. One correspondence voices concerns with regard to the protected bike parking, and one voices concern with vehicle parking. The project is categorically exempt per section 1533(2) infill development projects. Recommendation, staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission review and approve the proposed plan subject to the attached findings and the conditions of approval. And with that, we are happy to answer any questions you guys have.
And the applicant is also here tonight to present the project refinement.
Any questions?
This is staff report.
With that, we'll turn it to the project sponsor for a presentation.
My name is Richard Tapp. I'm the architect for the project, and we've made, I think Christopher's gone over most of the revisions that we've done. What we tried to do was, obviously we had to respond to the zoning amendment issue, which we have done. And we've done that very openly. We've been open with staff about it, and we wanted to make sure we were open with the Commission and also the public as well. So the intent, originally we submitted for the 4 units, and that's what we were told we were allowed by city planning staff and by the current zoning code. And then the old table from I think 1970, 50 years ago, had this conflict. So if the wheels of government turn slowly, and so it'll take about 3 months, I think, for the zoning amendment to go through. So what we decided to do was go ahead and get approval for the 3 units. The envelope has not changed. So the size, the bulk of the building has not changed at all. What we did do is we took the top unit and we created a very large 4-bedroom unit, and we did it in the minimal way that would affect the actual construction, but still it actually works as a 4-bedroom unit. We modified it so we have a large family room and the 4 bedrooms. But the intent is that once the zoning amendment goes through, we will go ahead and come back with the original proposal for the 4 units. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. I think there was a letter that you received from a Mr. Pipkin, and I thought this gentleman was him, but apparently a different person. He was questioning, and he was questioning that we were masquerading a 3-unit project for a 4-unit, and that's not the intention at all. So then, as far as the revisions that we did, we tried to respect the comments that you made specifically. There was most of them we took up. There were some that we didn't for different reasons, and I can explain those if necessary. Then what we did address, though, we addressed the parking issue with the bike parking. That was one of the primary comments, I think, consistent from all the commissioners. So we addressed that by moving the building forward. I think Commissioner Donaldson suggested that by moving it forward, we would provide more, space for bike parking at the rear. I thought that was a great suggestion. So we moved ahead with that. And then, as far as the height for the commercial, Commissioner Waddy was questioning why we had such a low ceiling height at 9.6. for a commercial, and we then decided to go ahead and raise it to the 10 foot. And it increased the height slightly. We also had a review with the structural engineer to make sure our floor assemblies were correct, and he recommended that we go to 13 inches instead of 12 inches for floor structure, so that added 3 inches to the total height. So basically that's it. As far as the bike parking, the car parking is exactly the same as before. We still have the we still have the ADA parking requirement, and we added one bike parking space. They're single at the present time, single level, but when we come back for the 4 units, we will have double stacked parking covered, so that will provide 8 parking spaces for bikes. And we also did add one in the one for the commercial in the front sidewalk. And that's typical bike, the bike design, which is a great design and adds to the improvements of the sidewalk. So that was the parking primarily. Let me just see here. Oh, and then the other thing that we did do was on the northern side. Well, if we could stay here, Christopher. But as far as the height issue goes, this is the front corner view, and you really don't see the roof, the sloping roof from this angle, nor do you do from the front or from the rear. You do see it from the side from a long way away, but we did slope it. We respected the setback for the residential, which is 10 foot on the adjoining residential lot, and you go up 28 feet at 10 feet, and then you go over 45 degrees. So we respected that, and then we followed that 45. We followed a similar slope on the stair. So and then as far as the graphic that you have in your packet indicates that the railing encroaches, and it does at the rear, but at the front it does not. And if you looked at the front elevation and the side elevation, the railing doesn't project into the 35 feet. There's a slope down from front to rear, and that's about a 2-foot slope from front to back of the property. There's also a cross slope on the sidewalk going from north to south. So when we're pinpointing the 5'3" is actually the maximum that we encroach. In other areas we encroach less. So that's the encroachment issue. And then the other thing is, by moving the building forward, if you have the rear elevation, Christopher?
I can pull it up, but would the rendering suffice for now?
Yeah, the rendering.
Oh, okay.
That'd be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. So what happened here is, by pushing the building forward the 18 inches, we're actually able, before the original design had circular steel posts here, here, and here. And so by pushing the building forward, we're able to gain we're using that distance to bring a blade wall down, which is a strong wall post, and it gives much more seismic stability to the rear. And it also matches the front. Can you flip to the front? Yeah, so these elements continue down at the front. So the rear now matches the front in design concept. We weren't able to take the full advantage of the bump out. So what we did is we took the wall down, the bump out still occurs, so there's a shadow line at the second floor. Then as far as the other comments, as far as we're proposing unbundled parking, so that means that the parking is not designated to any unit, and so therefore if one unit, if someone's out on that parking spot, someone else, one of the other tenants can come in and use that space. So it means the parking is going to be much more usable. So if someone is commuting to the city, city all day. If it was designated, then that parking space would be vacant. But in this case, it'll be used. So that's one issue. As far as the roof deck goes, we decided not to go with physical planters where everything is built in. The trellis would increase the encroachment on the setback. We decided not to do that. And rather than build in fixed planters that cause a lot of maintenance issues and drainage issues and quite often leakage, we decided to go with more of the pot plant approach. If during the staff, if they wanted to designate areas where the pot plants should go, we're very, we can accommodate that. We do want to have it, we do want to, on the roof plan, we wanted to show, so from a screening point of view, we wanted to make sure that there was ample planting and vegetation on this side, so it gave a little bit of a buffer to the residential on the south. And then the rest of it is furniture, so it can be moved around, but we did relocate the barbecue so it's back towards the stair. It's a propane barbecue, it is not gas. As far as the utilities on the roof, there will be water for irrigation, there will be a hose bib for cleaning and maintenance. And the light, as far as there will be an electrical outlet up there. There was a question in a letter to you, I think, from Mr. Pipkin about what utilities were on the roof deck, and so we would also make sure that the lighting is, directional and downward pointing, so it isn't a distraction or doesn't provide glare to the neighbours. As far as, let's see here, the trees in the parking area, there was a comment by the chairman the other time about the not having trees in the parking, but we do have I think probably about 6 to 8 trees in the parking lot. We don't have anything separate in the middle because we don't have space, but they are, and the idea is we're looking at doing pencil pines in concept so that they're a vertical tree element rather than something that's broad, because the parking is very tight. And then the window framing details and the depth of the windows, etc., that will be part of our building permit submittal and reviewed by staff. Also the permeable paving. That's something that we haven't got our drainage plan yet. We'll have a civil engineer do the drainage plan, and at that time he'll propose something that we can work with staff, but it'll be we'll have permeable paving. I just don't know where it will be and what makes sense. So that was that. As far as some other comments about the roof deck is only accessible to the tenants, the residential tenants, and there is no access by the commercial at all. And the other thing too is the type of commercial use is not a cafe. A cafe came up in discussion primarily because the owner had a restaurant before, a long time ago, and so he thought, oh well, maybe it could be a cafe or a restaurant. The concept though is for probably it's not the primary location for a restaurant. It's not on Solano Avenue. I think it's more of a personal service or professional business type of environment. So the comment of having 20 to 30 customers coming in, I don't think it'll be a top retail spot. So it's more of a destination commercial facility. And then lastly, I think then, the issue of parking. So, and this is jumping, we comply with the parking now with 3 units and 3 parking spaces with, double the, with slightly more bicycle parking than that's required. However, the parking will be an issue with a fourth unit. And with our original submittal, we came in for a parking reduction, and that was the conditional use permit. And based on the substituting in the zoning ordinance, you can substitute bicycle parking. for a car space, and we're complying with that. In addition, we're unbundling the parking, which makes the 3 spaces much more usable. We're right next to Solano, which is a transit corridor with AC transit, and schools, so the amount of car rides will be less. BART is reasonably close for bicycling, and also you have the bike trail just there, so students can bike to Berkeley, the college, and without any problem. So I think from a parking point of view, we can easily substantiate or justify a parking reduction. However, that is in the future. That's for when we come in with the 4th unit.
Great.
Anything else? Any questions?
So I can ask one question. Explain to me how you envision the unbundled parking working then, and so.
So
I'm kind of interested in the financial end of it. Where are the financial incentives going to?
well, I'll talk to the.
I don't need to know specific dollars, but.
No, so the concept is, so with the 3 units, right, currently, each tenant will have the right in their lease to use one of those spaces.
Okay.
Right, and so they have that right, and then and then, as I said, if there's only 3 people, but there might be a unit that has 2 cars in the family, and therefore, if instead of having one parked on the street, if someone's commuted into San Francisco, then they can use that. They can use that space. So the intent is that the spaces will be as full as we don't want people parking on the street because with empty spaces because it's not allocated to them.
Okay. I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Any other questions? Great. Thank you. With that, we'll open it up for public comment.
There was one other thing, the north wall that we decided not to do from the art project. We decided not to do a mural, but we did add some fenestrate. We did add some modulation to that by adding a grid. We're going to build the stucco out an inch. We'll do shades there, so it'll have the impression that there's a deeper recess. So, and I think it works quite well. We've got 3 different colours there, and the banding responds or reflects the structure of the building.
Great. With that, is there anyone here as part of the public comment who'd like to speak? Thanks. Please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, Preston Jordan. Excited to see this building. Looking forward to it being built. Hopefully it will be built. If you could put up the rear rendering. Yeah, so you see the bicycle parking there. What's shown there doesn't match what's on the plan for the southwest corner. So the southwest corner in the plan shows area for trash cans or a trash can enclosure, and then the bike parking next to it, so you're not seeing the trash can enclosure there. Also, the bike parking that's shown is not seem to meet the code. The code, Albany code, is bicycle storage protected, individually enclosed, and secure space for bicycle. This includes bicycle lockers, electronic lockers, and interior bicycle parking. So I would ask that you ask for a better rendering of what actually is proposed there and something that actually complies with the code. I'm certainly excited to hear that the applicant plans to put in even more bike parking or stacked bike parking, because this obviously is a great spot for people to get around by bike from. Stepping from that to the electrical or to the mechanical systems in the building, the appliances, I don't know if you received it a few weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago, I sent a general message to this body regarding the need to prohibit natural gas in new construction in Albany if we're going to make our greenhouse pollution reduction goal. Pretty much all the resources out there says if you keep installing natural gas in buildings, you're just going to torpedo your ability to meet these goals, which for Albany is, I think, a 60% reduction by 2035, if I recall correctly. I think this is the first building I think that's coming in because we've now made these properties more valuable by reducing the parking requirements. So I think it's fair to say, we cut the parking requirement in half or perhaps even more, depending upon if you grant this building an exception. It used to be 2 off-street parking spaces per unit, is my understanding. and Measure N1 reduced that, or it gave the council the authority to reduce that. So we've increased the value of these properties pretty dramatically. I think it's reasonable to say we want these buildings to be all electric. Obviously, this application came in under the existing code, so all I can suggest is that you would encourage the applicant to look at that. In new build, my understanding is that all electric is getting pretty close to cost competitive with putting in natural gas because you save on the piping and everything else, and heat pump technologies come a long ways. As far as future buildings, there's been 2 larger developments that have been proposed, or at least that have come to you for early discussion that seem to be made possible by the parking reduction. So I would really hope that you would look at changing Albany's requirements to prohibit natural gas in these new buildings before those come along, because one of them is a 9-unit townhome project, another one's an 18-unit project, or 20-unit, depends on how it comes in on San Pablo, and so it'd be really unfortunate for Albany if natural gas got locked into those. Thank you.
Anyone else for public comment? Please come on up.
Good evening, Richard Pipkin, 900 block of Masonic Avenue. I'd like to congratulate the architect. The building is quite lovely and the renderings are quite nice, and I look forward to meeting my future neighbors at that site. Apologize for not making the earlier meeting. For whatever reason, I wasn't aware of it, the development, until fairly recently. I did review the minutes from the previous meeting, and I noticed that parking was brought up by the next door neighbor to this site already, which I know him, and obviously parking is an issue at the site, and that's what I'm here to basically say is I'm asking the commission to reconsider the cumulative effect of numerous things that both the project and other events have are looking at creating here. One being, maybe it's a cafe, maybe it's not. Contrary to the report, the house was actually most recently used as a single dwelling unit again from about 3 years ago until the building was sold recently. But either way, even before that, when it was a chiropractor, it was a very low volume commercial place there that is obviously going to go up by a lot. Maybe not tenfold if it's not a cafe, maybe it's something less than that. But that's consistent with the zoning code. I understand that. Also, as you mentioned earlier, yeah, 6 parking spots were removed in the restriping of Masonic Avenue. And those parking spots happen to be the curb right in front of this property, as well as the curb across the street right in front of this property. So it is right there. You know, by the same token, we're basically looking at quadrupling the number of people who live on this particular site. At the same point in time, we're looking at reducing the parking that's actually available on the site right now. So I recognize the need for densification. I understand it doesn't say the gateway to Northern California or Northern Alameda County anymore there. It says urban village by the bay. It's needed, housing is needed. I encourage you to take a balanced approach and realize that, you know, that criteria of 1 parking spot per unit, which this really is a 4-unit building, should be upheld. And the cumulative effect of all these things with commercials, the nature of the commercial place changing, the parking spots that have already been removed, and the number of people that are now living on this site, parking is going to be drastically affected. As someone who's lived on that block for over 12 years, every afternoon, if you drive by there, despite the fact that there's no homes on the opposite side of the street, that whole curb line is almost always taken up when I come home around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I urge the commission to reconsider the parking that's being required for this project. Thank you.
Any other members of the public? Well, why don't we first close public comment? There's no one else, and then sure, if you have some final comments.
No, it was just a comment about the bike parking. This was artistic license, and the trees were already located. We added the bikes to better show that we were doing the bikes, and we moved the bikes away from so you could see them. They're really a little bit further in. The representation on the plan that Mr. Jordan said is correct. And what we will do is we've got to work with the with the trash company to work out the number of receptacles that they need, and then we're going to have a divider, and it will be locked, and we will follow all the requirements for the parking. But I just wanted to...
Okay. Do you have any comments on the natural gas versus electricity question?
Well, the only thing on that is that we've
You
talked...
should probably come to the microphone for the...
The issue of the gas versus electric is more of a Title 24 issue. And for getting Title 24 compliance, a lot of the time using electric heat actually, is very hard to make it work. It depends on the windows, the insulation. It's a balance for the whole envelope of the building. But typical electric heat is a lot harder to calculate out and satisfy the Title 24 requirements. Okay. It can be done, but it's a balancing act on...
Have you ever looked, I don't think you, probably not, have you ever looked at solar panels on the roof, or most space is occupied with your open space? But.
Yeah, we could look at doing that. It hasn't really been looked at, though, as a specific, program item.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. With that, turn it back to the commission. Commission comments?
I can start. I guess just an observation that I think what we're being asked to approve tonight is it's a little weird because we're not actually being asked to approve a project that involves a parking exception. And I understand your point that this really, and I think, the applicant has been open about this. They want it to be a 4-unit project, but that's not what's before us tonight. And I think that in an ideal world, we would be considering the project that the applicant actually wants to build. So there's a part of me that thinks we just, that thinks maybe it would be better to continue this and wait until the zoning ordinance is amended, assuming that goes through, and then, deal with the actual project and talk about the parking exception. But, could I support this as a 3-unit project with, compliant parking? I'm not opposed to that. And so, I don't know, I guess I'm of two minds about it. I kind of want to talk about all of the other issues, but because we don't have a parking, there's no parking action before us tonight. And I guess I'm inclined to, if this is what the applicant wants to pursue right now, I think, I'm inclined to want to keep the discussion on that point. But I did just want to acknowledge that it's a little funky the way this is happening. That said, I would rather see this be a 4-unit project than a 3-unit project. I think it makes sense. I think it's kind of, maybe there's a market to have a 4-unit apartment like that, but it seems like it fits better with the vision that we talked about for this site at the last meeting, to have just the 4 smaller units. And with respect to the bike parking, yes, I am a little disappointed that we aren't seeing something tonight with the the bike lockers that comply, or the other secured bike storage that complies with the code. But I understand the renderings, may not need to show all that detail. I do think it's important that that's included, and so I want to make sure that, that is conditioned. And with respect to the car parking, and again, not dealing with an exception right now, but just thinking of the parking that is there, I think the way that you're talking about unbundling the parking is maybe different from how that term is frequently used. How I understand that term to generally be used is that it means you charge one rent for the unit, for the dwelling unit, and a separate rent for the parking space, which a person, which the resident can either choose to avail themselves of or not. The way you described it was, well, everybody gets a space, which I guess if you have 3 spaces and 3 units, maybe that's fine. But if everybody thinks they're getting a space with their rent, then I don't know that it actually works to say, well, if you have 2 cars, you can just come in during the day and use your neighbor's space. Like, I think that needs to be thought through a little more. And I don't know what the right answer is about that sitting here today, but if you do come back to us with a parking exception, I think it's really important to get those details worked out, because I think we do need to make certain findings that there's a plan in place to manage the potential conflicts around this, and I recognize the public comments that that even without asking for a 4th unit, there may be constraints on parking, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that this project that we're looking at today is consistent with the code. So yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Sure.
I do like the project overall, and I think the other refinements to the design, moving it forward and whatnot, I think are positive. Thanks.
Those are good comments, thanks. Yeah, gentlemen, I like the project a lot. I liked it when we first saw it, and I think it'll be it's very well designed, and I appreciate how you've been responsive to our comments and the depth, the careful thought you've put into designing the building and looking at the very options. I think you've done a very nice job with the design, and so I like it. I think Commissioner Jennings' comments are right. We should be careful about what we're looking at tonight, and I think we're looking at a 3-unit building with compliant parking, and that's what you've asked us to act on, and I think that's what the issue in front of us, and we realize that we may have to do a parking exception or discuss that in the coming months. It's very possible. And I think Megan's comments about the unbundled are well taken. I also have concern about that. I've always thought that unbundled parking would have said, well, your lease would be X dollars and you would pay 10% of that every month for additional to have a parking space on site. And that doesn't appear to be what you're talking about. So I think what you're talking about I would call unassigned parking spaces for 1 car for each unit. I think that's the impression I get of what you're proposing. And I wouldn't call it unbundled, but they might not be assigned, but and I would say it should be limited to 1 car for each unit. And I believe you when you say you can meet the code provision that Preston has pointed out regarding the safe and secure parking for bicycles, and so with those kind of assurances, I'd be happy to move forward with the project, and I could support it and vote for it tonight.
Yeah, this is my first time sitting in the project, although I did listening the last meeting.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Pointed but not confirmed, so here's a actual comment to listen. And I would say that I really appreciate this project a lot. I like the way the facades are done, I like the variation of materials, the breaking up the masses looks great, windows should be fine. Might not be coming through live.
It's not on, I don't think.
Let's turn it underneath.
It's underneath.
Wasn't on, sorry. Yeah, so I like the renderings, I like the facades. Balconies give it some texture, some depth, same with the shading. I think the fact that you're able to build it out shows the absurdity, the same volume, same square footage, shows the absurdity in the zoning regulations. I think it would be much better as a 4-unit building. I think 2-bedroom units would be kind of much more fitting for this location, for this kind of urban area.
and probably filling a bigger need in the city of Albany for smaller type housing. I do have some similar questions, kind of about mechanical systems. You know, the other drawback to natural gas is you basically have tailpipe emissions coming out your roof, which I think could severely impact or even render useless your roof deck. You know, there are ways to really minimize your energy needs for heating. You know, there are lots of environmental certifications, Passive House for one, which I don't know if that would be appropriate for the commercial space, but at least for the residential side, you could really limit how much heat and energy you need to put into the building, and there are lots of other appliances that are very effective for water heating, all these kind of things. So I would also encourage you to go all electric, putting solar panels on the roof to offset some of that electrical use would be great. Let's see, just some other things. The bike storage, I guess we are in this awkward position of you're presenting it, you know, like on the face of it, we have a 3-unit building, no parking exception, but in some ways we're looking at it as if it were 4 units. And then if you come back, there are things that we would want to see, which kind of makes sense to put them in now. I mean, I don't know where that line is or how. I mean, it's a little awkward, honestly. But if there is a parking exception, then I would really like to see 8 bike lockers. In the sense, I mean, the hope here would be that since it is very transit oriented in terms of bike path, BART stations, et cetera, that some of the parking needs would be offset by people able to not use vehicles. I mean, that would be the hope. That would be the goal. And with that in mind, I think 8 bike parking spots would be great. And it would really help to see that built out in your plans and in your elevations, because at the moment, you don't see it in either side elevation, rear elevation. It's just an open space. So I think that needs to be drawn in and shown. And then the other idea about bike storage is that cargo bikes are very popular, but they're a bit longer. So the idea of making it a little more flexible in terms of what kind of bikes you could park, at least maybe on the bottom level. You're never going to lift a cargo bike into an upper bike level or a bike locker, that's for sure. So maybe some bike parking space that is 6 or 7 feet long would be very helpful. And I'm not quite sure how you do that in that little overhang space, but maybe there's a way to take away a little bit of the back commercial space. And I have a feeling you're underestimating your trash area size and needs, but you'll work that out somewhere. Somewhere, I don't know exactly, your site's tight. And then regarding permeable pavers, I think so much of the lot is covered. I mean, almost 90% of it from, I mean, just a rough guess, but almost 90%. I would like to see the whole parking area and driveway be permeable pavers, you know, with the requisite layer of gravel underneath to absorb rainwater, and then whatever runoff you have from your roof can be absorbed into that area as well as kind of a large dissipation dry well. I think that works really well. Other thoughts? Well, the commercial space, you know, if it were a restaurant, I think then it really does become kind of problematic, especially in terms of what kind of food prep is going on, what kind of exhaust vents you're having, even a cafe space. I don't know what kind of food prep. I mean, it would be less than a restaurant, but I mean, there's no, we don't limit or any, there's no restriction on what kind of commercial enterprise goes in there, is there? But I'd have to say a restaurant would be very problematic. You start putting cooking vents up to that roof, you know, I don't see how that could really be a usable open space roof deck. So what else? That's really it. Otherwise, I support the project. I think it's a great kind of urban infill. I think that's kind of exactly what we should be looking for in this kind of neighborhood and that location. I'm sorry to see the tree go. It's a beautiful tree, but, you know, so there you have it.
So I just have a few additional comments. I agree with much of what my fellow commissioners have said. It is, to me, kind of a shame that we're seeing this now before the code changes happen, because I do very much think the higher density project is a better project, and very much agree that I think it's the market that's lacking the most, especially in this part of Albany. Aside from, you know, the condos down by the freeway, there aren't a whole lot of sort of smaller size units that are probably at a more financially accessible price point for families moving into Albany, and I think this is the perfect location to have smaller sized units. So hopefully we will see that coming in the next phase here. You know, a little bit on the architecture, I sort of commend some of the little shifts that you made, including sort of the recessed residential entry, and it really highlights the commercial area, I think, more prominently. I think that combination works a bit better, and to improve that overall design. I do still have some concerns about the northern wall. I don't really feel like the solution solved the problem. It still feels just like a big blank wall with some banding tacked up on it. You know, if those spaces were to be designed for, you know, a green wall, or again, and I think there wasn't a rendering, I think it was just on the elevation of the northern wall. But everything else, and I guess it's sort of a commendment of the architecture elsewhere on the building. You know, the other three sides of the building have been designed very well and have a nice balance of sort of material composition and sort of a changing up of different palettes, and sort of the ins and the outs and the texture. And then the other wall, which is actually the wall that's going to be the most visible from Solano, is a little blank. So I do still have some concerns about that. And then on the, you know, some other details, which I think are things that are easy enough to work through with staff at the building permit level. But to me, again, a building like this, the devil's going to be in the details of how these materials are all executed. I think as rendered, it looks beautiful. And if the stucco is, you know, a 3-coat stucco or hard coat stucco, that's great. If it's sort of a lower quality applied material, I think it could look really poor. Same with the windows in terms of the depth of the reveal and the quality of the aluminum windows. There's such a dramatic variety of quality on aluminum framed windows, from really, really beautiful contemporary aluminum windows to really sort of crummy, flimsy looking ones. And so I would just want to make sure that, you know, when staff's reviewing this, we're looking at sort of really deep reveals and really high quality aluminum windows for that. The hardy board, I have a little bit of torn feelings on, because I think as rendered, it looks like a really nice stained, you know, wood product, but it's spec'd as hardy, which then makes me think it's probably just like a brown hardy, which wouldn't be my preference. So I think if we're going to approve this as some sort of fiber cement product on here, we should make sure that it's a smooth texture rather than sort of that faux wood looking textured hardy board. So again, getting into the weeds here, but that I guess is what we are here to do. And then I guess my last comments are, I completely agree on the bike parking and the screening of the garbage cans. I mean, to me, I would just put it very simply. I think the garbage cans and the bike parking should be enclosed. I don't think they should just be left under the cantilevered extension. It does look like you guys have about an additional 25 square feet or so of square footage allowed within your FAR. I would be comfortable if under that cantilever that was, you know, filled in for your garbage cans so that they're enclosed and secured from weather. But also then to, you know, you may want to take up additional space from the back of the commercial tenant space. I do think it's a fairly long tenant space anyhow, so likely that's all back of house anyhow, to dedicate to really well-designed bike parking spaces that will actually be utilized, and to include things, you know, a space that could accommodate like a cargo bike or things of that nature. So I would certainly be supportive of that being incorporated as a condition of approval to the project. And then final two comments on the permeability. I completely agree. I think normally on a project like this, we see a little bit more robust of a landscape plan because there's actually a rear yard typically that we'll be seeing. But since this is basically driveway and maneuvering area for cars, it's really minimized just sort of the edges being stripped with landscaping. So I think sort of as the offset to that, instead of looking at this more comprehensive landscape plan, I would want certainly at least as a condition that the driveway and the back parking area are permeable pavers, as sort of, again, that offset of not having it be a traditionally landscaped rear yard. And then I guess my final comment, and I'm not sort of hard and fast on this, but it appears where the cars are at least facing, where their lights would be shining forward, will also be visible from Solano, because I believe there's a break in the street wall on Solano at that portion. It's sort of in between, forget the two businesses, but sort of after Zari's, there's kind of some breaks, and then there's a building of that house. And then there's another sort of break before the corner building.
Right.
And I think that's exactly where kind of those cars are lined up. And so there's no fence there, and so these cars are definitely going to be visible on Solano, and I feel like as a sort of a general good planning principle, vehicles should be screened from, if they're going to be on private property, let's screen them from view. And I'm a little worried about these just looking a little cluttered back there, especially from, again, walking on Solano. So I would want to either see, well, I think probably the best solution at this point, at the degree to which this has been designed, is to just sort of require some fencing to be along there. And that may be the intent and just not shown on the plans anyway. But I think we would want to make sure that there's, a 6-foot tall fence or something of that. That's, again, designed in an integrated way and incorporated around the building, but that type of a feature is included. So, yeah, I don't know exactly where to go with the northern wall, because I think we're pretty far away from just sort of tacking on a condition of approval to deal with the design of the northern wall, but I'm open to thoughts of my fellow commissioners on what they would like to do.
Yeah, I agree with your comments. Yeah, very well taken. I have no problem with fiber cement board. I much prefer the smooth, and if you detail the corners well, actually they look better if they're just cut corners without wood corner or solid corners. They look much better, and painted out, they're great. It's very resistant, fire resistant, rot resistant, et cetera. So, I mean, I don't have a problem with that material per se. And I agree with the idea about screening the parking area. I think it's a good idea. And then the northern wall, that is also one I forgot to mention. But yeah, I don't feel like this kind of frame is really there yet, or I don't particularly like it that much, and I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, this is a situation where it could get built over at some point in the future, so you can't do too much there, but I'd almost rather see just maybe some sort of artful expansion joint pattern and multicolored stucco or something, but yeah, the framework looks a little too simple to me, and it's hard to vary the depth. If the idea is that it could just be covered up with a zero lot line, so you can't really do too much. That's why I think the art project is not appropriate. But I think it just needs more finesse, and I agree. It needs as much finesse in its own way, and it's even harder because it's so simple to do it. But as you put in as much attention as you put into the rest of the facade, you need to do something similar on this north side to, same kind of fine-grained texture of some kind. Or
maybe just to sort of chime in on that, I mean, there's no reason that you can't have that same play of stucco and hardy and sort of playing on those materials on the property line. You can't put openings, but you could certainly continue that sort of surface material palette and or sort of wrap it all the way around, if you will, so that the building really reads on all four sides as sort of this same vision and material palette.
Well, that's true. Yeah, fiber cement board would lend itself. It's inert, basically, once it's, it could be covered up. Yeah,
Sure, come on up. Yes, please come to the mic.
Street view.
The one thing, just talking about the north facade, is that Mr. C's building, the adjacent building, is actually goes halfway up our facade. So we've got there's a neighbourhood or a street, I have it here, and you can see that, next one, towards the front, I think it's A2.
There.
Oh, right here, yeah. So basically we're this high already.
Yeah.
So, we're zero lot line. So, from that point of view, we didn't want to spend a lot of money on something that can't really be seen anyway, and could be built up against, sometime in the near future.
I guess the only thing I would comment is Mr. C's building is only about half the depth of your building. So it doesn't go the full depth, lot depth of your building. It only goes about half that. So in terms of that view shed from Solano, there's still going to be a significant amount of that building that's solidly exposed and visible.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we can, it's basically, we could look at doing the cement board on that area. It's primarily a cost issue. The building's already a pretty expensive little building with all the ins and outs and balconies, etc. The other thing is that we have a substantial art project that we have to do, which is probably, and cost is not your issue at all, but it factors into the developer, and also it factors into the rents that you end up having to charge people. So we want to make sure that the north facade looks good from Solano Avenue. So we don't want it to be, definitely don't want it to be a detriment. And I thought the banding was a good solution. I think with the stucco colours, and I think it's probably a little bit better than just the reveals. The reveals up close work very well, but I think from a distance they'd be lost. And so by doing the banding with the colours on colours, shade on shade, we create more of a shadow look. So.
Could I ask you a question again? Have you thought about the permeable paving, and have you costed that out? And is that a big additional cost item?
Well, we'd looked at the permeable. We'd looked at paving for about 3/4 of the driveway. The rear parking area, we had basically looked at either permeable asphalt or a concrete, but I'd rather go with a permeable asphalt.
In the part where the cars
in the parking area.
And then
the paving would go down.
On the
past
side.
the residential to about 3/4 of the way down, and then we'd do a transition.
I see.
Okay. So from that point of view, if we do pavers for the whole parking area, it becomes a maintenance issue, but also it is a significant cost issue. One thing I could say, I haven't mentioned this to Adam, the owner, but we could look at doing some sort of we could look at on the top banding area, the top third of the building, the top story. We could look at doing something where we did a green wall, where we could look at we could do a metal grid and then have vines growing on it. We could work out some irrigation from the top going down, and that's something that wouldn't be a major expense. I don't think the fire department would have a problem. Anything you do on a zero lot line, the fire department guys look at. So, I don't know whether they would say that that could be a flammable, or combustible item, but we could look at that. That would be something that would be, I think, an enhancement and a cost effect, a reasonable cost. Mm-hmm. And if it was built over, it's not something that's a waste.
Mm-hmm. I'm Adham Nasser, the owner of the project. I'd just like to interject here that whatever I develop, I want your comments about making it look good, that's for my interest to do. So we're on the same side, and I want to do that. Whatever it takes, cost, it's not, I'm not an unlimited budget. I have a limit, but whatever I could afford, I will do.
So it seems to me like, you know, with respect to, and you can sit down as far as I'm concerned, but it seems to me like on this north facade issue in particular, like we can either say, I would be comfortable with just encouraging the applicant to work with staff on refining the north wall. If others feel like that's not enough, then I think our other options are to either impose a specific condition of approval, a kind of directing what we want them to do, or we continue it. But I think we probably, you know, I don't think we're likely going to design it sitting up here tonight.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to be designing on the fly.
Yeah.
I would be comfortable deferring that to staff to just say to continue working through some other design solutions other than what's been proposed. Either a variety of sort of material articulation, green wall, if that's allowed under, you know, fire code, or something of the sort, you know, even integrating windows if they're fire-rated windows. I mean, I don't know. There are options out there, but I'm fine deferring that to staff, yeah.
Could I ask staff and Christopher, if, is this our only chance at design review? If this comes back for a 4-unit project, then the issues would not be design review. Is that right?
You would actually have an amendment for design review because it's adding another unit.
Okay,
So it
so
would be an
we-
amendment to this current application.
Okay,
But
okay.
I think if you impose a condition.
So in a way, it's kind of
requiring.
like continuing it, we'll have another
Yeah.
chance to look
And
at
if
that.
you can include this condition tonight, we can work with the applicant so
Yeah,
that when this,
I'm comfortable.
provided the changes move forward and this application comes back to you, you will be looking at a modified design.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
I'm fine with letting the applicant find their own design path through this, but, yeah.
Okay. And I concurred with all of the other specific recommendations, a lot of which I think were just in the category of encourage the applicant to look at things like including solar. I think it's, Mr. Jordan's comments are well taken about the natural gas. I think as you kind of acknowledged, it's probably better to go about that discussion in a more holistic way in terms of talking about, you know, if there's going to be some sort of city policy around that. And so I don't think, you know, we're in a position to impose those requirements on a particular project right now. But I think, you know, encourage you to look at those. And what else? I'm just trying to summarize. I know you guys were taking good notes. Permeable paving, yeah, to the extent that's feasible. I agree with that comment as well. And ensuring that not only the bike storage, but the garbage is enclosed and adequate. And there may be others as well, but I didn't
making
hear
a motion, or-
Well, I didn't. Yeah, I'm just trying to summarize. So I didn't hear anything I disagreed with. I'll say that. But yeah, on the north wall thing, it sounds like I think deferring that to the applicant and staff to work out seems appropriate. So sure, I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve planning application 18090 with the recommendations that we discussed this evening.
Okay. I'm prepared to second that motion, and I think the issues will, staff, is that good? Are you okay with that, or should I reiterate? Okay, I think that's good. All right.
Great.
Then I'm prepared to, I'll second the motion.
Okay, great. Then on that vote, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Okay,
No? Great.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you do now have, 14-day appeal
Right.
period,
That's
so
right.
leave any
That's
story
right.
pulls up.
That's right.
All right. On to item 7-3, study session, design review of new pylon sign for Target.
Given the late hour, we'll go through this pretty quickly, but just to tell you at a high level, this is a study session for a proposed pylon sign. This is a fairly unique request. We'll go through that. And so for your purposes this evening, you're not being asked to take any action. We're really kind of checking in with you to see if this is a request that you can support. And if it is, we would come back to you at a future hearing date. Just to give you some context, the applicant is seeking a design review approval for a 50-foot tall pylon sign at Target at 1057 East Shore. The site is approximately 9 acres. It's actually about 168,000 square feet with the demolition of the garden center, which was approved last fall. So at that time, the commission approved the demolition of the garden center, a parking reduction, and the parcel map that creates a 1.1 acre parcel, which will be sold off separately. This is an aerial of the property to give you some additional context. And this is not only the street view, but the proposed location of the pylon sign. So currently, Target has this monument signage that was approved as part of the original design package. And it's what's been in place since. Their proposal tonight is actually, it not only increases the visibility with the overall proposed height, but it would also allow for signage for separate tenants. Again, the project was approved in 2003 with several entitlements, including an EIR, conditional use permit design review, a parcel map at that time, and a variance for the height limit. As part of this request, Target has identified the need for increased visibility within the I-80 corridor as their basis. They also cited concerns regarding the Gilman interchange upgrades that would affect their visibility for future customers to the store. So within the sign section of the zoning code, we have definitions for both freestanding sign as well as shopping center. So this fits the definition for freestanding sign, and this ultimately is a shopping center. There are a couple tenants within the store, including, I think, CVS, Starbucks, and Pizza Hut. And then when that resultant parcel is sold off, that will be a 5th tenant that will be there. And this is a rendering of the sign as proposed. So it is 50 feet tall. It effectively takes that monument sign, puts it to the top of the pylon, and then provides these additional sign shells for tenants, but be it the future tenant or existing tenants within the store. But this is the limitation. It would be for 2 tenants. Based on how the applicant has kind of structured this request, the tenant signage, the Target signage and tenant signage totals 150 square feet. So the Target logo and copy would obviously be the predominant signage that one would see. And this then goes back to the shopping center definition for a freestanding identification sign, which sets a size threshold of 150 square feet. So the Target designed this to kind of fit within that development standard. And so this is kind of the interesting part for the commission. You have complete discretion in architectural review. The code is a little bit vague, other than you have the right to prescribe your review on a case-by-case basis. So you don't really have a lot of direction within the code or with any sort of policy document that might address standards for signage. So this is why we're bringing it to you tonight as a study session item. I think the other concern that we have is that this would set a precedent as one of the tallest signs in the city. Just for your comparison purposes, the Golden Gate Field sign is 65 feet in height. It's obviously quite a bit different. It's a larger sign. It also has animation, if you will. And so given that you have this broad authority for architectural sign review and the precedent-setting nature of this request, we're seeking your guidance before proceeding further. We have not received correspondence in regards to this project. And the project is categorically exempt under CEQA. And with that, we're asking, this should have been changed, but we're asking just for general guidance as how to proceed, given that you have the discretion over architectural design.
Can I ask, when was that Golden Gate Field sign approved or installed?
I think it was a long time ago.
That's what I think too.
Yeah.
Do we think, I mean, I'm just curious, like and maybe there aren't any different standards that it would apply. I mean, maybe it would be the same conversation, like it's just complete discretion, but I'm basically wondering if that is a non-conforming sign or if it's something that theoretically could be approved today.
So in regards to the animation, there's actually a whole section of the the sign ordinance that deals with that and allows it, but conveniently, it only allows it on 25-acre parcels, which leads me to conclude that the code was actually structured to make the sign conforming.
Okay.
And I don't know whether that was done as part of the code update in 2004, if that was a provision on the books.
We didn't, 2004 didn't touch the sign ordinance.
That's right, so then it would go back to 1978.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, the sign ordinance goes way back. It was to 78 or before, probably 78. Yeah.
I had a question. Is there anything in the sign ordinance right now that regulates the sort of totality of signs on a given parcel? Or is it just individual typologies of signs have their own sort of heights and area?
So this is where it gets tricky. In other zoning districts, so the San Pablo and Solano commercials, the signage area is determined by the linear frontage of the building. The CMX is kind of the Wild West. It's complete discretion.
Great. And then just one other quick question on this. So just to make sure I sort of understood the rationale for this. So it's effectively the desire from this is being driven by changes occurring with the freeway?
So I think it's twofold, if I understand it correctly. It's the future sale of the parcel and the potential to increase the visibility since it's set back. There are changes proposed with the Gilman interchange right now. That's in the CEQA phase. That's being handled through the Alameda County Transportation Commission. How that would affect Target is that basically the frontage road of East Shore, as you would access it from Gilman currently, is going to go away. So if somebody was coming up Gilman, they'd have to go up Second Street and follow signage.
So they wouldn't be able to hit a right on frontage road coming
Right, they'd have
west
to
on
do a
Gilman?
little bit of a zigzag, or alternatively, if they don't want to drive through the industrial area of West Berkeley, they're more likely going to get on the freeway and then exit at Buchanan and then circle back.
You
Well,
don't sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
You don't happen to have a diagram of the Gilman interchange as it's proposed, or it's just, I guess I haven't seen that part where that part of the frontage road is.
It's
Yeah.
a double roundabout, very complex, yeah.
Yeah, it's in the
not-
CEQA phase, and quite frankly, I think it's going to be
It'll
at
be
least a
changed,
decade
probably
before
be
we see any
somewhat
change.
changed.
Looked at it, but I haven't really seen that
It's,
Yeah.
part being closed off.
no, I can't either.
Well,
It's a crazy intersection.
I mean,
So that will significantly impact how people get to their store.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That would, yeah, it could, it certainly could, yeah.
Or just Buchanan would be much, much better for them.
I mean, I'll just sort of share some initial thoughts that I have. So I feel if those are the, sort of, if that's the rationale for the proposed signage, I feel like I don't really support this proposal. I don't feel like we're quite there. If there was something else going on, like, there's a new taller building that's, being built just south of it, for example, that's maybe blocking their signage, or those changes on the freeway have actually been approved, because, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point, the CEQA is litigated, or, things extend. We don't actually know what's going to happen. And so it almost just feels like it's an increased benefit to increase the sale of the parcel that's going to be sold off. I don't know. I don't totally see the driver. I mean, I think when that parcel is sold and there's a development proposal on that parcel, we can certainly at that time look at a signage proposal that's tied to that development to make sure that it's adequately visible. But I feel it feels a little premature to be doing a sign that's for a hypothetical development that we don't have, and doing a signage for a hypothetical change to a freeway that we don't yet know has happened, and a hypothetical intersection change at Gilman that we also don't know that's happening yet. So none of those things are actually happening. And I feel like Target is fairly well branded and very visibly branded already. So I don't know. I guess my perspective is I'm just not seeing sort of the balance of a very, very large pylon sign, which I think I'm typically sort of predisposed to not support. I'm not quite getting the reasons why I would support it. So I don't know. Those are my initial thoughts on it.
Okay, let's see, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I'm not sure I would go there yet. My first thoughts are, like, how might this affect people living in Albany? And I and I guess I have a lot of questions more than whether I know I would support it or not. Let's see, what questions do I have? The first one was like, how tall is the 50 feet? And I'm wondering, like, there's some power poles and streetlight standards that are down there right now that are very tall, and they might, I'd like to know how tall those are before, when they come back with an application. See, there's a streetlight standard there, and then down on the frontage road, there's a tall power pole that I suspect is about the height of the sign. The other thing what I would be really interested in is, where is the sign visible from? And if it comes back to us, I'd like to see some, maybe photo simulations from some of the key viewpoints you had in your attachment about what the sign would look like. From along the frontage road, probably, maybe from a view from the freeway, a view from when you're getting off the freeway on the Buchanan ramp, and maybe a view coming from the north too. I didn't go through, I just thought of this here. I didn't go through and pick out the viewpoints, but I would like to see a couple of photo simulations about what the sign would look like. I think the sign that's there right now is really modest for a huge store, and that in a way they deserve bigger signage. And we certainly have the precedent with Golden Gate Field sign and the Ranch 99 sign, which I really hate.
Oh, I don't want to use that as an example.
It's terrible. I mean, it's
No, that sign is just awful. It violates
Yeah.
Richmond's zoning code, and they approved it anyway, and they did so without a Caltrans encroachment permit.
Yeah.
So I don't want to use that as a benchmark to anything that we would do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your point's well taken. We need to probably look at other signs. What's the old Wooden Duck they have signage that's visible from the freeway. They've changed their name now. I don't think it's Wooden Duck anymore, is it?
Yeah, I think it has changed hands.
I can't remember now, but the signage is similar. But and those are not illuminated signs, or they're certainly not internally illuminated. But I understand Target's point in their write-up about having the row of shops in front of the store. The store is set way back, and the new lot that they're going to sell off is going to have even poorer visual access. And so I understand, I think I understand their desire for having the ability to advertise some other businesses besides Target here. I think, I didn't look today when I was out there, but I think also that Target store has a super large Target on it.
It does.
On the facade, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, that's what I was doing on my phone. I was trying to get the
In a way, that's the
street view.
That's huge signage.
Yeah.
That's their identification. That's probably why this sign is small. But this side this side tells drivers where to turn in, because that building itself has such a huge sign on it. So that would kind of go to Elizabeth's argument. Why do they need this? Kind of thing. So, I don't know.
I'm curious when, sorry.
I think that's my thoughts.
I'm curious when Target was approved, like, were there any, I don't know, I guess I'm just curious what the discussion was around the signage and whether they asked for something bigger and taller at that point, because I'm sure that visibility was a concern in 2004 as well. So I'm mostly just curious about that, because I don't think it necessarily, determines what we do now, but I'm just wondering if we've been down this road before. My general feedback is that I believe the reasons that you might want something that is more visible. I recognize that it is set back, and especially, for an additional parcel that's even more set back, it will be important for there to be some kind of signage for that site, assuming it's, developed for commercial uses. I think 50 feet is too tall, but I'm just kind of assuming it's too tall based on the the figures that we did receive. I also was thinking that, seeing photo sims would really help to understand what that looks like here. I still think I'm probably going to think 50 feet is too tall, but that doesn't mean, like maybe there is something else that could be more visible, but not quite, quite so glaring. I do think it's unlikely that we would approve a sign like the Golden Gate Fields sign today. It's for a variety of reasons, but including the height. And so I know you're not trying to go that high or that big or with animation. So it's not apples to apples, but just something that's approaching that height still seems like an outlier in this part of Albany, or in Albany, period. So I don't know. I think we would need to hear a little bit more about the reasons and a little bit more about precedent for similar signs in the area, and really make the case that this fits in with other things the city has done. So that's, I don't know how helpful that is. I'm not opposed to, entertaining some additional signage or something that's more visible. As presented, I think it would probably be hard for me to support, but.
Yeah, I
It's time
agree
for
with,
all of us as we drive Interstate 80 in particular, to kind of be more conscious of the signage that's out there with this coming to us. I will, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with most of these comments. Not opposed to a sign per se. This little monument sign you have seems minuscule compared to, the size of the development, and obviously not very easy to see from the freeway, which I think is the main point. It's orienting drivers coming to your store, right, to signal, here it is, and better get over the right lane and get off the freeway. I guess my main question is just kind of how big is big enough to be effective? And I think some sort of photo study showing the scale relative to the other buildings, or how it would be perceived from, I think it's mostly going northbound that it's important. 'Cause I did actually drive by there the other day, and the big round Target sign on the building is big as day when you're going south.
Yeah.
Having said that, I'm also a little curious about the size of the sign, because we said 150, but could you pull up the rendering? Yeah, it says 11 feet wide, and then how tall is the red box? Do we know, or do you have a dimension for that, or?
The dimension's not specifically called out, yeah.
Well, it looks like twice as tall as it is wide, so something like 20 feet. I mean, how are we deciding how big this sign is? I mean, to me, that looks like it's like over 200 square feet.
Because the branding is part of the color is part of the branding.
Well, for me, the size of the sign would be the outline of that whole thing. I mean, how else do we define the size of the sign? I mean, it's not just the sum of the little parts necessarily. So that's also a very, very big block up there. And I think if that was shrunk proportionally, within all your corporate guidelines, then I think that would help. I think 50 feet for me is too tall. I just don't know. I mean, again, how high would it need to be effective? And I think 50 feet is like taller than that would be. Yeah. But where exactly that line is, I don't know exactly, without a little more information or a little more of a rendering or something. I mean, and then going back to the idea of selling off the other parcels and these providing signage for that, I mean, are we getting, by having one sign with smaller tenant signs, are we getting away from the possibility that there could be 3 signs going up? Or, I mean, are there limits on the numbers of signs? Is it 150 square foot per shopping center, or? So for that whole development area,
That's effectively the only threshold on the books that we have to work with.
So that 150 square feet applies to that whole area.
Yeah, it
Development
applies
area.
to the proposed freestanding sign for the entire property.
Okay, so it all does need to be contained in one.
Sort of like the shopping center entrance signage, if you will, is kind of.
Yeah, so, yeah, I guess I would say that I would support it, but I would like to see it proportionally smaller, reduced to what I would consider to be 100 square feet, 150 square feet on the outline, ignoring the sides and pylon, which is also pretty big, but so proportionally shrinking the whole block up there, and then somewhere I think it's got to be lower. You know, I think, I mean, as opposed to the little monument sign, I think that's way too small. This is way too big, and somewhere there's a balance in between, so. That would be my feedback.
I think the Toyota operation next door has some new signage on it too. I want to go take a look at that, and that's also brightly illuminated. It really shows up at night, so that's something else to consider. And, as far as the signage context is concerned along the freeway there.
Any other comments?
No.
Is there anything they can say to us, or is it appropriate for them to?
You have any? Yeah.
If you want.
Sure.
Some of what we have to say.
Hi, I'm Greg Friel with PLS Partners for Target. Many of the comments you stated were exactly the reasons Target is pursuing this sign. They recognize that things are changing along the corridor and that they would like to be proactive. The store is not very visible as one is traveling north on the freeway. The public storage building, which is 3 stories tall over in Berkeley, sort of blocks the view of the building as you're traveling north along the freeway. The stores between, the shops between East Shore Highway and the Target store, while they're currently 1 and 2 story, Target does not control those, and they could be developed at any time into taller buildings and further isolate Target. You're correct in that in the marketing of the new proposed lot, Target would like to be able to offer signage so that they can attract top-tier tenants and make the site a viable, you know, and get you guys the most tax base they can from the development of that property. As one is traveling north on the freeway, the current sign isn't visible until you're past the exit for Buchanan Avenue. There is really no visibility of the site. Even traveling north on East Shore, the sign isn't visible until you're within about 150 feet of it because of the existing buildings right up along the street frontage. Yeah, we have pictures. They're not in your report, but they were in what we submitted to the thing. And then it's true, the proposed changes to the East Shore Highway has Target very concerned about visibility and one more page. The photo study? Okay. Yeah, here's the public storage building. As one is traveling along that building effectively blocks that whole frontage of Target there. See, you can barely see the red at the front of it, let alone at the back. And again, as one is traveling up East Shore, all of these frontage buildings right along the street frontage block any visibility of the existing sign. And coming from the south, yes, you have a good opportunity to see the store, but you're past it before you realize you needed to exit to get there. So you're going to have to be dealing with the Gilman interchange, and we'd like to have some element that creates a focus so that you can direct yourself towards the site. We're not trying to be what the racetrack has in the way of signage with height or anything like that. That's not our intention to try and be that. Those street lights that were near the frontage, near the entry, are probably 25 to 35 feet tall. So I don't think we're being excessive at going at 50. We're just slightly above those so that they have a clear view over the two-story buildings along the frontage there. And we can address any technical questions about the signage. We have Jack Abel from Aero Signs here to answer anything that you might have. And really, that's Target's intention, is trying to be proactive for the future changes along the frontage and maintain their visibility and their sales so that their tax base stays up. Any questions?
That store is not underperforming, is it? Or
I wouldn't say it's underperforming, but I think it could perform better.
yeah.
Yeah, I will say, I think that maybe part of what you're hearing from us is like that we recognize things may be changing, but there's nothing immediate. We're hearing, we just heard the Gilman interchange stuff.
Right.
Like there may not be shovels in the ground for many years.
I understand
There's
that
no
also, yeah.
proposal to jack up the height of the buildings on the front side. And if there were, I think that's a fact that would, be very compelling to allow Target to increase its signage. So, I think like those are things that we can deal with, but just in the abstract, the idea of putting up a 50-foot sign just to have better visibility, I think we probably need something more compelling, and the height is still probably a concern. So what I would like to see is, these photos and some other photos with that sign superimposed, so we can understand what we're actually talking about here. And again, I personally am in favor of allowing you to have signage so that people can exit the freeway and, decide to spend their dollars here before they get up to Pinole or wherever the next one is.
Richmond.
But, Richmond, yes. That's fine. I'm fine with that. But I would like to tend toward what's the minimal approach that gets us that visibility without overkill.
Yeah, and I would concur with that. I would just say the other information that I think would be very helpful is having, I don't think it's super sincere to have photos from the frontage road. I don't think most people actually go to Target from the frontage road. They're coming from the freeway, and I think that's where I'm missing the exit issue comes into place when you're on the freeway.
I did do the Google Street View along the freeway.
Great. And so I think to be able to have the freeway view with the rendering of the signage, I think is critical. But I think it's also important in the rendering proposal to give maybe some options instead of just here's what 50 is, maybe a combination of, can you do I don't know if it's permitted, can you do a roof mounted sign on the southwestern corner of the Target building that may also bring visibility rather than sort of this larger monument sign? Are there a few different alternative proposals that maybe we could see in rendered form? So, if in fact the 50-foot monument looks the best and makes the most sense, we can see it relative to what some of the other options might be. And I think that would be helpful. I'm still a little hard pressed at just authorizing something to increase your sort of sale potential for a future development that's TBD. I mean, again, I think this commission reviews things in a very timely manner, and so if there is a future tenant going in there who has signage needs, I would feel more comfortable crossing those bridges when we have realities in front of us rather than in the hypothetical. Because again, I think we're seeing things in less than a month from submittal dates sometimes. So, I don't.
And I think we're reasonable.
Far out. Yes. But anyhow, hopefully that gives you the sort of the information that we would need to make sort of a decision in any future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
Great. Well, with that.
They were the first ones here.
On to item 8, announcements, communication, discussions, staff.
Just two things very briefly. You had received some correspondence from us last week via email. I just wanted to acknowledge that correspondence that was received on different topics. Preston referred to one of his emails tonight. There was another email regarding 578 Cleveland, and I think there was another email in there. It's unusual to get correspondence out of the package and then to get 3 correspondences out of the package. I thought it best just to acknowledge that as part of our announcements. The other thing, just another reminder, on February 25th, you will have the training session, advisory body training session here in this room at 6:30.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Next meeting, Wednesday, the 27th.
Wednesday, the 27th.
With that, we're adjourned.
Thanks.
Notices this weekend.
Thank you all.